On the night before Halloween, October 30th, 2001, police were called to a home in the affluent Coral Gables neighborhood of Florida after an alarm was triggered. Upon arrival, officers uncovered a horrifying crime scene. A woman was found brutally murdered on her kitchen floor in what looked like a scene from a horror movie. Blood covered the walls, with splatters even reaching the ceiling, a clear indication of extreme violence. Investigators determined that the victim, 45 years old Maggie Locascio, had been attacked after parking her car in her open garage. It appeared that the assailant had been waiting for her and struck as she exited the car. Though she managed to flee into the house, the attacker pursued her and ended her life there. Maggie was the estranged wife of Edward Locascio, to whom she had been married for nearly 30 years. They had recently separated and had not been living together for months. Maggie had even attempted to file a restraining order against Edward. Their separation was part of a contentious divorce, driven largely by Edward's repeated infidelities. The process was further complicated by serious disputes over financial matters, making him the immediate prime suspect. Maggie and Edward had met in 1972 while studying accounting at the University of Miami. After graduating, they married and worked as accountants. In 1982, Maggie became a homemaker following the birth of their son, Eddie Jr. Over time, Edward climbed the professional ladder, founding his own company and managing the finances of wealthy Miami clients. Unlike Edward, who was sociable and charismatic, Maggie was described as more private and reserved. In 1992, they purchased a mansion in prestigious Coral Gables, but by 2001, Edward had moved into an apartment in South Beach, just 10 minutes away by car. When police contacted Edward, they withheld the true nature of the situation and told him only that there had been an issue at his former home due to an alarm. They asked him to come by to assist. Edward arrived shortly afterward, appearing calm and cooperative as he spoke with investigators. He displayed no concern or curiosity about why the area was surrounded by police tape or why there were so many officers present. His indifference was notable, especially given that his estranged wife Maggie still lived at the house. Detectives eventually brought him to the station for further questioning. During his interview, Edward explained that he and Maggie were going through a divorce and had stopped interacting. He acknowledged that their relationship had been strained, with disagreements escalating to the point where Maggie had sought a restraining order against him for alleged threats, domestic violence, and abusive behavior. The first hearing related to their divorce was scheduled for the next morning. When police finally informed Edward that Maggie had been murdered, he showed no visible reaction. Meanwhile, Edward and Maggie's 19-year-old son, Eddie, was also being questioned in another room at the station. Eddie stated that he had been at the library that evening, and his alibi was confirmed. After the interrogations, Eddie crossed paths with his father in the corridor. Unlike Edward, who remained emotionless, Eddie displayed visible anger and disbelief. Later, Eddie told reporters that at that moment, he became convinced his father was responsible for his mother's murder. Tensions between Eddie and his father had already been high in recent years, and this tragic event only deepened the divide between them. Eddie openly despised his father, viewing him as a personification of the worst human traits. Despite Eddie's doubts, Edward claimed he had spent the day playing golf and was in his apartment on South Beach, several kilometers from the crime scene. At the time of the alleged murder, CCTV footage from his apartment confirmed his alibi, proving he couldn't have been the killer. Even though Edward was quickly ruled out as the perpetrator, the police remained suspicious of him. He had a strong motive for wanting Maggie dead, and the violent nature of the crime suggested hatred, likely from someone close to her. Investigators considered the possibility that he might have hired someone to carry out the murder. While reviewing the details of the case, a detective recalled seeing a white pickup truck making an illegal maneuver near Maggie's house on the night of the murder. Although he had wanted to stop the driver, he was responding to an emergency call at Maggie's residence. Now, he suspected the truck's driver might have been fleeing the crime scene. When asked if he knew anyone who owned a white pickup truck, Edward denied it. The investigation intensified, and the next day, a local resident contacted authorities about a small sports bag found in the bushes between his property and Maggie's house. The bag turned out to be crucial evidence. Inside were a blood-stained knife, bloody clothing, and Maggie's stolen credit cards. The bag was sent to a crime lab for analysis, where investigators hoped to find DNA, fibers, or fingerprints to identify the killer. 2 days after Maggie's death, Edward reported a break-in at his office. Police found no evidence of theft, but the office was in disarray, with documents scattered on the floor, taking advantage of the situation. Detectives interviewed Edward's employees about him and his family. A worker revealed that Edward's brother, Michael Lacasio, owned a white pickup truck, the same type of vehicle spotted near the crime scene. This revelation marked a turning point in the investigation. Michael, who lived in Charlotte, North Carolina, was quickly located by police. His truck immediately attracted attention because the seats had just been upholstered. When police removed the seat covers, they found the old fabric was stained and showed signs of having been pressure washed, possibly to remove evidence such as blood, since a complete clean was not possible. The seats were upholstered with new fabric. Unlike Edward, Michael had a troubled history. At 41 years old, he was unemployed, struggling with a banned substance addiction, and had a prior fraud conviction. It seemed plausible that he might commit murder, particularly if motivated by a banned substance or financial gain. Although no incriminating evidence directly connected Michael to the crime scene, the sports bag near Maggie's house became a critical clue. Latex gloves inside the bag contained Michael's DNA. Tests ruled out Edward and Eddie, confirming Michael as the likely suspect. 2 weeks after Maggie's murder, the lab results were finalized, and Michael was charged with killing Maggie. Eddie was shocked to learn that his uncle, Michael, was involved in the incident. He suspected that Michael could not have acted alone, because how could someone who lives so far away travel so far just to commit a crime? Eddie suspected there was more to the story and thought his father might somehow be connected. Regardless, the police needed concrete evidence to prove anything further. While there was no direct evidence implicating Edward, his brother, Michael was preparing to stand trial. Meanwhile, Edward continued with his everyday life, going to work and even dating. Michael faced murder charges, with prosecutors hoping he would confess and implicate Edward, who was believed, according to Eddie, to be the mastermind behind the crime. Prosecutors were confident they could uncover the truth, especially given that Michael faced the death penalty if convicted. Despite strong pressure, Michael firmly refused to plead guilty or testify against Edward, asserting his innocence. During the trial, prosecutors made it clear they believed both Michael and Edward were involved. However, this did not change Michael's stance. Although the prosecution presented strong evidence against Michael, much of it was circumstantial. His defense lawyer argued that the evidence was questionable due to procedural errors during the investigation and lab work. Furthermore, there was no clear motive, and much of the case relied on indirect evidence. Despite these arguments, the jury deliberated for only 6 hours before finding Michael guilty of first-degree murder. He was sentenced to life in prison without parole, a punishment likely designed to pressure him into confessing or exposing Edward's role in the crime. After the verdict, Eddie stepped in, determined to fight what he saw as an unjust decision. At just 19 years old, Eddie had already graduated from college and was attending the University of Miami Medical School, where he excelled academically. His relationship with his father, Edward, had always been strained. He never even called him Dad, referring to him as Ed instead. He pursued his studies with one key purpose: to help his mother, Maggie, escape her abusive marriage. Despite his efforts, he was unable to save her. However, he gained financial independence and tried to help her secure a divorce. Starting with a court injunction against Edward, Eddie believed his father's refusal to split their assets fairly was at the heart of the conflict. Under Florida law, divorcing spouses were required to divide their wealth equally. Edward, whose fortune was estimated at $6 million, refused to comply. He even tried to hide some of his wealth, but Maggie, an experienced accountant, discovered his deception and was determined to expose it. According to Eddie, Maggie was murdered because she was planning to reveal Edward's hidden accounts to the court just hours before their divorce trial began. The day after her murder, Edward's lawyer petitioned the court to terminate the divorce proceedings due to Maggie's death, a move that struck many as suspicious and calculating. With the case dismissed, Edward stood to retain control of all the family assets. Eddie was horrified by his father's cold reaction to his mother's death. He seemed entirely unbothered, despite having been married to her for years. Edward's greed and lack of remorse convinced Eddie that his father was responsible for the murder. Seeking justice, Eddie filed a civil lawsuit to block Edward from taking complete control of the family fortune and won the case. However, he faced significant challenges with the criminal investigation, which stalled for years. After 4 years with no progress, prosecutors doubted they would ever uncover the truth. Everything changed in November 2005 when authorities decided to move forward with the evidence they had, believing no new leads would emerge. Edward Locascio was arrested and charged with first-degree murder and conspiracy to murder his wife, Maggie. Eddie saw this as a significant victory, but it was just the start of a much tougher battle. After spending 4 years securing a conviction against his uncle Michael for his mother's murder, Eddie now faced the challenge of bringing his father, Edward, to justice. This trial was far more complex due to the absence of direct evidence. In Michael's case, the crime scene held undeniable proof, including DNA and the murder weapon. However, Edward's charges rested solely on circumstantial evidence, giving his defense team considerable room to argue. The prosecution claimed Edward orchestrated Maggie's murder due to a strong financial motive. During their divorce proceedings, Edward stood to lose a large portion of his assets. Although he had hidden much of his wealth in offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands, Maggie had uncovered the deception and planned to expose him in court. Unwilling to let this happen, Edward allegedly convinced his brother Michael to carry out the murder. Prosecutors argued that Edward had not only planned the killing, but had also influenced Michael to commit the brutal act. Graphic photos revealed the horrifying nature of Maggie's death. She had been savagely attacked with both a knife and a baton. She suffered multiple blunt force injuries that caused fractures, and the assailant had continued stabbing her even after the initial beating. The prosecution contended that this extreme violence stemmed directly from Edward's malicious intent. With little concrete evidence tying Edward to the crime, the case relied on motive, circumstantial evidence, and key witness testimonies. The first major point of suspicion came from Edward's lack of reaction when he was informed of Maggie's death. Although there was no written or recorded evidence of a conspiracy between Edward and Michael, phone records showed a spike in the number of calls between the brothers in the weeks leading up to the murder. Previously, they had only communicated occasionally on special occasions, but records showed that they had begun calling each other on an unusually daily basis 6 weeks before Maggie's death. This sudden change became a major point of suspicion for investigators. The prosecution argued that Edward used these calls to pressure Michael into committing the crime and to finalize the plan. A critical witness was Edward's secretary, Gudile Gonzalez, who testified that she overheard several phone calls between Edward and Michael. After realizing the nature of these conversations, Gudile said Edward began threatening her, warning her to stay silent or risk being killed. Frightened, she eventually went to the police. Eddie, Edward and Maggie's son, also took the stand, recounting years of abuse Maggie suffered during her marriage. He described instances in which Edward had beaten his mother, threatened her, and even came close to hitting her with a heavy sculpture. According to Eddie, Edward openly threatened to kill Maggie 5 months before her death, after she revealed her intention to file for divorce. Tensions escalated when Maggie caught Edward having an affair with Eleanor Salazar, a masseuse. Eleanor also testified in court, stating that she was at Edward's house at around 11:30 p.m. on the night of the murder and witnessed a conversation between Edward and Michael. Surveillance footage from Edward's house supported Eleanor's account. The video showed Michael arriving at Edward's home around midnight, drenched and visibly distressed. He was seen gesturing wildly, which the prosecution interpreted as a sign that he had just finished cleaning blood out of his truck. Eleanor further testified that Edward later threatened her, warning that she would suffer a fate worse than Maggie's if she went to the authorities. Surveillance footage partially verified Edward's whereabouts that night, while bolstering Eleanor's credibility. Financial records also uncovered Edward's multi-million-dollar offshore accounts, which he had concealed during the divorce to limit what Maggie could claim. This financial evidence reinforced the prosecution's claim about Edward's motive, emphasizing that Maggie's knowledge of his hidden assets posed a serious threat to him. Edward's behavior after the murder raised serious concerns. He quickly moved on with his life, even starting a new relationship. During an argument with his new girlfriend, Edward allegedly threatened her, stating that she would end up like his wife. Alarmed by this threat, she decided to report it to the police. In court, the prosecution presented a gruesome reconstruction of the murder. Using a mannequin, they demonstrated how Michael brutally attacked Maggie. She suffered 8 blows to the head with a metal baton but remained conscious and tried to defend herself. The assault bent the baton, rendering it useless. Maggie sustained severe defensive injuries, including nearly losing a finger while trying to protect herself. Despite her resistance, Michael continued his attack, pinning her against a wall and eventually standing on her chest to ensure her death. Blood evidence found throughout the house supported the prosecution's narrative. However, Edward's defense focused on the lack of direct evidence linking him to a conspiracy with Michael. There were no written or recorded agreements or explicit discussions about the crime. However, the prosecution asserted that Edward had a clear motive, suspicious behavior, and personality, and called on the jury to consider the circumstantial evidence and witness testimony. Following the murder, no money was transferred to Michael, and Edward did not provide him with any support while he was in prison. Michael appeared to gain nothing from the crime and had no clear motive to kill Maggie. Initially, investigators speculated that the killer might have had a secret relationship with Maggie, but there was no evidence to confirm this, as they had no prior contact. Edward's lawyer argued that the attack was random, possibly driven by Michael's mental state or substance abuse. In contrast, the prosecution maintained that Edward had strong motives to want his wife gone. Adding to the complexity, Edward's defense painted him as a kind and loving husband and father. They presented photos of a happy family life and called witnesses to attest to his character. The defense also attempted to shift the narrative by suggesting that Eddie, Edward's own son, may have had a financial motive to target his father in order to inherit the family's wealth. The most damaging testimony came from Edward's secretary, Goodallay. She testified that Edward had threatened her and stated that Michael would kill Maggie. The defense countered by arguing that Goodallay's story had changed multiple times, which weakened her credibility. The prosecution explained her inconsistencies as stemming from her discomfort with Edward's explicit and obscene language, which she rephrased for the jury. Nevertheless, her changing story raised questions about her reliability. Further complicating the situation, the defense pointed out that Goodallay was in a long-term romantic relationship with the lead detective on the case, which raised ethical concerns. By the time of Edward's trial, she had been living with the detective for over a year. The defense argued that this relationship undermined her testimony, suggesting that her involvement was part of a deliberate effort to bias the case against Edward. Another key point presented by the prosecution was the 39 phone calls exchanged between Edward and Michael over the course of 6 weeks. Previously, the brothers had little to no contact, often going years without speaking. The content of these calls remains unknown. The defense argued that the calls were innocent, suggesting that the brothers had simply grown closer during Edward's divorce proceedings. However, the The dramatic increase in communication heightened the suspicion surrounding Edward's involvement. The argument that Edward had a financial motive for murder was dismissed. Even if he had lost half of his assets in a divorce, he would still have remained a millionaire, making it illogical for him to take such a drastic action. The defense also claimed that Michael, due to his struggles with addiction and mental health issues, might have committed the crime without having a clear motive. They suggested Michael could have misinterpreted Edward's frustration over the divorce and acted impulsively against Maggie. Furthermore, the defense argued that Michael's unstable nature would have made it unlikely for him to remain silent and not implicate Edward, especially when facing the death penalty. After both sides presented their cases, the jury deliberated for several days. The case was challenging, as it relied primarily on circumstantial evidence. Initially, the jury debated Edward's and Michael's motives, but eventually focused on Edward's potential financial incentives and Michael's apparent lack of motive. On the third day of deliberations, the jury reached a verdict. Edward Locascio was found guilty of first-degree murder. His son, Eddie, and his grandmother were present at the sentencing. Eddie expressed relief over the verdict, feeling that justice had finally been served after 6 long years since his mother's death. Although Edward initially faced the possibility of the death penalty, the jury recommended a life sentence without parole, which was ultimately imposed. Given Edward's age, this effectively meant he would remain in prison for the rest of his life. However, the decision enraged Eddie, who firmly believed that the death penalty would have been more appropriate. 6 months into his imprisonment, Edward gave an interview where he continued to proclaim his innocence. He denied encouraging his brother Michael to commit the murder, claiming that he had hoped to reconcile with Maggie before her death. He insisted he never believed Michael was capable of such a brutal crime and alleged that both he and Michael had been framed. Michael also maintained his innocence and never confessed. Nevertheless, DNA evidence confirmed his involvement, and the timing of the murder, just before a contentious divorce hearing, was difficult to dismiss as mere coincidence. During the interview, Edward suggested that his son, Eddie, may have orchestrated the crime. He theorized that Eddie, eager to inherit his parents' fortune, might have set him up to take the blame. Edward reiterated that the divorce settlement would not have left him destitute, leaving him no reason to kill Maggie. Eddie strongly denied these accusations. Edward Locascio later passed away on August 30th, 2018, at the age of 67 in a prison hospital in Lake Butler, Florida. The home where the murder occurred was eventually sold for $3 million. Eddie went on to become a doctor, dedicating his life to helping others.
Welcome back to our channel. Today, we will explore a new case, the case of Maria Lehner and Laura Dalton. There are individuals who can be described as true parasites. Living off others for extended periods, they are cunning manipulators who constantly exploit their victims. Even more frighteningly, some do not hesitate to take their behavior to the extreme, committing crimes with unimaginable cruelty. On the evening of March 19, 1999, residents of an apartment complex near the Iowa City campus were alarmed by a strong smell of burning and smoke coming from one of the apartments. Some residents stepped outside and saw a fierce fire raging through the windows of a small apartment. They immediately called the fire department. When firefighters arrived on the scene, the fire had already spread, shattering windows and producing thick columns of black smoke. Despite their best efforts, extinguishing the fire proved difficult. Neighbors stated that the apartment was believed to be unoccupied. As the permanent residents were out of town, firefighters initially focused on fighting the fire from the outside before entering the building. Once inside, the smoke began to clear. A desolation scene unfolded. The entire apartment had been devastated. With furniture and belongings reduced to ashes, they found a body lying near the entrance to the hallway. More shockingly, a second body was found in a back room. Both bodies were burned beyond recognition. The first body, located near the door, was less severely burned and was identified as a young woman who appeared to have died from smoke inhalation while attempting to escape. The second body, lying on a bed in a back bedroom. With most of the flesh completely destroyed, it was impossible to identify the victims at the scene due to the severe burns. For this, an examination in the laboratory of forensic experts would be required. Police were quickly called in to investigate the cause of the fire and the deaths. Initial theories suggested that the victims may have succumbed to toxic fumes or suffered an accident, possibly caused by an unextinguished cigarette, since the apartment was a common rental for students during exam periods. Investigators also considered the possibility that the fire was linked to excessive drinking. However, what they uncovered next completely shifted the direction of the investigation. Among the ashes, firefighters found a few items that were surprisingly intact. Among these items, they discovered documents that could help identify the deceased. A driver's license was found in a purse belonging to one of the victims. Following an investigation, the forensic experts confirmed the identities of the victims in there. A victim was identified as 29-year-old Laura Dalton a few days before the fire. Laura had traveled to Iowa City to visit her cousin. Strangely, Laura neither owned nor rented the burned apartment, suggesting she had ended up there by chance. None of the neighbors recognized her. Laura had grown up in the area and lived with her parents before moving away as an adult. However, she often returned to her hometown to visit family and stayed for several days. Iowa City was her favorite place, where she enjoyed spending time not only with her relatives, but also with her friends. It was a charming town where most residents lived modest lives centered around education and part-time work. The second victim, Maria Lehner, was a 27-year-old woman. She came to this town on business. She lived in a rented apartment that was not the one involved in the fire. Maria, like Laura, had no known relationship or connection with the owners of the burned apartment. The next morning, Laura's cousin and Maria's mother went to the morgue to identify the bodies. However, the autopsy revealed a disturbing detail. Both victims had died before the fire started. Their lungs showed no signs of smoke or hot air inhalation, indicating they were not breathing when the fire consumed the apartment. Although the body was severely damaged, the forensic team quickly determined the cause of death to be blunt force trauma to the head, most likely from a construction tool. While inspecting the burned apartment, forensic experts discovered what appeared to be bloodstains and strands of hair. The police promptly began analyzing these as potential evidence. This evidence later confirmed their suspicions were right. A barbell was found in the apartment and identified as the murder weapon, as it contained traces of blood from both victims. During the apartment search, investigators also found an empty can, despite severe fire damage. Appeared to be a can typically used for storing and transporting fuel. Meanwhile, the owners of the apartment denied ever storing fuel in their home, so they determined it had been used shortly before the fire. Detectives concluded that the attacker had murdered Maria and Laura, poured gasoline from the can on their bodies and nearby furniture, and set the apartment on fire to destroy evidence. The presence of flammable substances made it clear that this was a deliberate and carefully planned double murder. However, proven facts, not assumptions, were needed to solve the case. Forensic experts thoroughly examined the scene. A cigarette butt was discovered near the bodies simultaneously. Forensic experts were in for a great surprise, as it turned out that traces of incipient decomposition were found on the bodies. This decomposition will take at least a day after death. No evidence suggested that the bodies had been moved to the apartment after the murders. Most likely, Maria and Laura were killed there, and their bodies were burned several days later. Through investigation, the investigators speculate that Laura was killed on the night between Wednesday and Thursday, and her body remained in the apartment. Maria was killed a day later. On the night between Thursday and Friday, this discovery shocked the police, as they had initially believed the arson was carried out immediately after the murders to destroy evidence. The most puzzling aspect was that Maria had been brought to the apartment where Laura's body had already been decomposing for a day. Laura's friends reported that the last time they saw her alive was on Wednesday evening. That night, the group of friends decided to spend the evening at a bar, and Laura joined them for a few hours. Everyone was having fun, drinking, and relaxing. They tried not to overindulge. During the evening, Laura met a young man who had been sitting at a nearby table for most of the night. As the group became more intoxicated, Laura and the man started talking. Witnesses later admitted they didn't pay much attention to him. The two quickly struck up a conversation, and after some time, the man suggested they go to another bar. Laura initially declined but eventually agreed. After some persuasion, witnesses stated that this was the last time anyone saw Laura alive. She left with the man shortly before midnight, according to the autopsy report. She was killed not long after. The thing to do now is to find this strange man. Unfortunately, no one knew his name and could not really describe his appearance. The police needed at least some details to begin the investigation. Witnesses were thoroughly questioned to create a rough profile of the unknown man. He was described as tall, around 20 years old or slightly older. With brown hair, witnesses also noted his disheveled appearance. Laura's friends were unaware of what had happened to her. She didn't call them the next day, and she hadn't contacted anyone at all. Laura also failed to attend the group's next party, held at the same bar the following evening. This time, Laura's friend, Maria, was present at the party. Maria's body was also later found in the burned apartment, and it appears she was killed just one day after Laura. Strangely, witnesses reported an almost identical story about Laura. Maria had been drinking with friends, and she caught the attention of a similarly unkempt young man sitting at a nearby table. He appeared friendly and spent much of the evening trying to charm her. The man seemed skilled at gaining trust, easily convincing Maria to leave with him for another party. She failed to recognize the threat and trusted the persuasive stranger. The bar owner also noticed them as they left. He provided the investigative agency with a slightly more detailed description of the man the investigator were searching for. This helped detectives create a more accurate sketch despite the limited information, but the investigation now had a lead. The police also identified his behavior pattern. He observed women in bars for extended periods, waiting until they were intoxicated enough to lower their guard before making his move. In addition, he had access to one of the rented apartments. Either using his own key or the trust of the landlords, the police interviewed everyone, including students, who might have had access to the burned apartment. However, most of them had moved out long ago and no longer had access. For a time, the investigation stalled. In addition to the help of forensic experts and laboratory tests, additional evidence is needed to advance the case. One of the key stages of the work was to conduct an analysis of the discovered empty can. The resulting picture was consistent with what is left by gasoline vapors. The empty can was clearly used to carry fuel, which was poured over the bodies. Among the other evidence found at the scene of the double murder was a matchbox with just one match missing. It appeared the perpetrator assumed the fire would destroy all evidence. However, the fire was extinguished before everything was consumed. Investigators concluded the match had been used to ignite the fire. Unfortunately, no fingerprints or DNA were found on the matchbox, leaving it unusable for identifying the suspect. After unsuccessful attempts at investigation, the investigators returned to the scene to look for more clues. By that point, the apartment had been cleaned and organized, making it impossible to find any new evidence. Initially, they had photographs taken at the scene of the fire. In one of the photos, they noticed a pair of suspicious glasses. These glasses matched descriptions provided by witnesses who had seen strangers at the bar days before the fire. Although the glasses survived the fire, they were not listed among the collected evidence. Fortunately, the apartment owner had not discarded them and handed them over to the police. when detectives examined the glasses. They discovered they also did not belong to the former tenants. The most valuable evidence ended up in the hands of the investigators, which later allowed them to obtain a huge amount of valuable information about the criminal to prove his connection with the murders, that these were not ordinary glasses, but ones with special lenses that correct vision. They were checked to determine what vision deviation the criminal had. This helped the detectives narrow down their suspect and determine whether these were his glasses. After that, the police officers had enough evidence and testimony to approximately reconstruct the picture of what happened. They reviewed the chain of events that led to this tragic outcome several times. In the end, the most probable version was recognized as the following. Presumably, both girls died one day before the fire started. The cause of death for each was prolonged beating with a blunt object, likely a barbell. They received head injuries incompatible with life to get rid of traces of the crime. The attacker decided to set fire to the apartment along with the bodies. The attacker appeared to stage the scene to resemble a real-life event. He placed the second victim in the hallway, while the first victim was beaten to death in bed. Afterward, he brought a gas can of gasoline into the apartment and carefully poured it over the furniture, floor, walls, and the victims' bodies. However, his critical mistake was smoking during the process. At the crime scene, forensic experts discovered a cigarette that had been extinguished and was not destroyed by the fire. Initially, no traces of the killer were found on the cigarette based on the circumstances. It seems the attacker was bent over, smoking, and pouring gasoline. When the concentration of vapors increased, the cigarette ignited. The resulting flames struck the attacker in the face, causing him to drop his glasses. The glasses were found slightly melted. It being in a less damaged part of the apartment, it is likely that the cigarette ignited the gasoline, triggering a chain reaction. This forced the killer to abandon the gas can, glasses, and cigarette at the crime scene, and assuming they would be destroyed in the fire. However, these items became key evidence. After interviewing the owner of the burned apartment, it was revealed that several valuable items, including 2 expensive household appliances, were missing. The investigators suspected the attacker would try to sell the stolen items, so they focused on local pawn shops. As these are the quickest and easiest places to sell stolen goods, their efforts paid off when they identified a suspect. After speaking with the owner of the pawn shop closest to the burned apartment, the detectives obtained receipts for items matching the stolen goods. Selling property at a pawn shop requires presenting an ID and filling out paperwork, which meant the attacker couldn't avoid giving his real name. This is how the investigators came across John Lee Memmer. John was a 20-year-old unemployed man who was well known in the city since he was a regular at various parties. He knew where to get a free drink. He was a good conversationalist and was described as a quiet guy. John attended various events after moving to the city. He had been jobless for a long time and didn't have a permanent home. He relied on friends, particularly students, who let him stay in their rented apartments, allowing him to get by. It is important to note that his appearance matches the description of the suspect and also often wears glasses. When the police looked into John's background, they discovered he had previously been conditionally released early for theft and document forgery. Now, John, the main suspect, could face a real prison sentence due to repeated offenses. An investigation also began into his possible involvement in the double murder. Immediately after that, John was arrested, and during interrogation, the police noticed slight burns on his face, including a small burn on his nose. This detail reinforced the detective's suspicion of his involvement in the fire. John appeared nervous and often hesitated before answering their questions. When he realized he was a suspect in the arson and murders, he began changing his story, leading to numerous contradictions. He claimed that, on that night, he broke in and stole several household appliances, which he later pawned. However, he denied any involvement in the arson or the murders of Maria and Laura. Refused to accept those charges. John explained that he had been using the apartment with another homeless man. Because knowing the owners would be out of town for an extended period, he described the second homeless man as suspicious and potentially dangerous. But the investigation could not confirm that this person existed. It seemed likely that John had fabricated the story to shift the blame. The investigators was determined that just a few days after the discovery of the two bodies, John visited an optical store and ordered new glasses using an old prescription. The glasses found in the burnt apartment completely corresponded to the prescription for correcting John's vision. This didn't seem like a mere coincidence. John was unable to explain why his glasses were found in the burned apartment, claiming he had lost them a long time ago. Following this, forensic experts decided to analyze the cigarette butt found at the arson site, suspecting it might contain DNA evidence from the perpetrator. By this point, John had already provided the investigators with samples for analysis. The results revealed traces of saliva and skin on the cigarette butt, which were examined and matched to John's DNA. This breakthrough was achieved using advanced forensic methods introduced in the late 1990s, which had become widely used by police at the time. These things strongly linked John to the crime scene. Though not directly to the victims, John later changed his story, admitting that he had been in the apartment and had snuck in with another homeless person when the apartment renter was not home. He offered a plausible explanation for why his glasses and cigarettes were found there. The police also focused on other pieces of evidence, particularly a leather jacket belonging of Laura, which was found in the ashes. Investigators began searching for traces of DNA. Initially, the jacket was examined under ultraviolet light, but no traces were found. Then, a different method was used to search for fingerprints. The fingerprint on Laura's jacket was identified as John's, however. This alone did not confirm his involvement in the murder. Detectives also examined John's shoes and the clothes he wore on the days of the murders. On one of his shoes, they found two tiny droplets of blood, about the size of a match head. Forensic scientists analyzed the samples and determined that the blood belonged to Maria. It was clear that John had attempted to wash his clothes, but traces of blood remained. Now, the police obtained undeniable proof of his guilt. John was unable to explain how the victim's blood ended up on his shoes. This detail became clear evidence that he had been in contact with Maria around the time of her death. When confronted with the accusations and presented with the evidence, John changed his story yet again. This time, he claimed that he had invited Maria and Laura over. They had been intimate. Then he left first, however, due to the condition of the bodies. This claim couldn't be verified. Forensic experts found no indication of an intimate relationship prior to Maria and Laura deaths. His story was clearly false, and his shifting testimonies only deepened the investigators' mistrust. With all the evidence collected, the prosecutor's office pieced together the chain of events leading to the fire and the double murder. John had gained access to the apartment while the tenants were out of town. There were no signs of forced entry. This easy access to the home alarmed the tenant's owner and moved elsewhere. After meeting Maria and Laura at a nightclub, John waited until they were intoxicated and less alert. He then initiated friendly conversation, flirted, and used his charm to gain their trust. Eventually, he convinced them to go to this apartment. His intention was to pursue intimacy, but neither Laura nor Maria reciprocated his advances. This rejection infuriated him and caused him to lose control. In his anger, he attacked Maria and Laura with a barbell. The severe head injuries they sustained from the blows resulted in their deaths the following day. On Friday, John returned to the scene to destroy evidence and steal household appliances from the apartment to cover his tracks. He set a fire, but made several mistakes, leaving behind significant evidence at the crime scene. A few days later, John was tried on charges of first-degree murder and arson. The defense has stressed that John is not known for being aggressive, although he has a history of minor crimes. He has never physically harmed anyone. Besides, One key point the prosecution has highlighted is the tattoo of 2 teardrops near his eyes, a symbol commonly used in the criminal world to indicate murder. He got these tattoos before attending the trial. However, John claims that the tattoo were merely a tribute to 2 friends who died in a car accident. The prosecution presented a combination of circumstantial and direct evidence to build its case. As John has never confessed to his guilt, the overwhelming evidence convinced the jury that John was the perpetrator. As a result, John Lee Memmer was convicted of 2 counts of first-degree murder and 1 count of arson. He's sentenced to 2 life sentences without the possibility of parole. After serving 10 years, John appealed, claiming that the public defenders had failed to do their job effectively. He argued that the prosecution relied heavily on circumstantial evidence and that his defense team had failed to adequately challenge it. The appeal was considered by the court. However, after a retrial, he was found guilty, and the sentence was upheld. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Kirk Langford. Masumi was born in the Japanese town of Sado to parents Hichi and Fiko. She has 2 older brothers, Kenya and Rio. Masumi grew up in a loving and supportive family, did well in school, earned good grades, and was well behaved. In her 20s, Masumi visited Hawaii for the first time with her family and immediately fell in love with the island after returning home. She decided to visit again the following year. In 2007, although her parents were initially reluctant to let her travel alone due to safety concerns, they eventually realized how important the trip was to her and agreed to her plan. At the age of 21, Masumi packed her bags, said goodbye to her family, and boarded a plane to Hawaii. She planned to stay for about 2 months and wanted to make the most of her time there. Her goals included improving her English and volunteering at Sunset Beach Elementary School, located nearby on the island of Oahu. During her time there, Masumi also enjoyed reading and studying history at the local library. Masumi was quite petite, and due to her astigmatism, she had to wear special glasses. She was a kind and somewhat naive girl, which could have made her an easy target for criminals. However, she did not feel any danger. Instead, she felt extremely comfortable living in Hawaii. As the weeks passed, Masumi's trip was filled with unforgettable joy. However, her vacation was coming to an end while she looked forward to reuniting with her loved ones. She also realized how much she would miss this sunny paradise and how long she would have to wait until her next visit on April 12, 2007, around 9:30 a.m. One of Masumi's friends dropped her off at the end of the road. And, as usual, Masumi decided to go for a walk. The area was not too isolated, so she felt safe. She walked along the road toward the home of her family friend, Yumi, with still half a mile to go. After 2 hours had passed without Masumi returning to house, Yumi's family began to worry. Yumi and her husband went looking for Masumi, but after searching the entire road without finding her, they felt that something was wrong. The couple called the police to report Masumi missing. The news quickly spread across the islands, and eventually, family friends notified Masumi's parents in Japan. Local residents soon organized a search effort. Masumi's small stature and limited English skills make her stand out, but they also make her more vulnerable to danger. The investigation began at the house where she was staying. Although nothing suspicious was found, experts collected DNA samples as a precaution. No clues were discovered. Her suitcase and plane ticket back to Japan were found on the table. As news of Masumi's disappearance spread, many people came to the police station with potential information about her whereabouts. A local resident provided a crucial piece of information, reporting that she had seen a young woman matching Masumi's description that morning. A man had tried to persuade her to get into a truck, but she repeatedly refused. The witness also recalled that the truck was white, which became a key detail in the investigation. Witnesses began searching the area for white trucks and checked the island's vehicle database. During this process, a second witness provided a similar account. adding that the truck had a company logo on its body. Fortunately, the man even remembered the name, Howoli Pest Control. This information significantly narrowed the search area. Police then identified the suspect as Kirk Langford, a technician for Howoli Pest Control. He was born in 1985 and grew up on the island of Oahu. A neighbor mentioned that the Langfords had moved to the area about a year and a half ago and that they generally received positive reviews. They were described as friendly and religious. Kirk and his pregnant girlfriend led a quiet life. They had a young son and were expecting a second child. Kirk was known as a kind and gentle man who hosted charity Bible studies at his home, and his family regularly attended church. He was considered a trustworthy and moral person. Therefore, when rumors of his involvement in Masumi's kidnapping arose, many found it hard to believe. Kirk himself repeatedly stated that he knew nothing about Masumi's disappearance and had no involvement in the incident. However, he admitted that he was in the area the morning of her disappearance and was driving a white truck at a certain time. He claimed that this was just a coincidence and suggested that witnesses may have been mistaken. There was not enough evidence to arrest him, so the police eventually released him but left their contact information, asking him to call if he remembered anything else in the days that followed. The police discovered that Kirk owned another white truck, a Ford F-150. They examined Masumi's belongings, such as her toothbrush and a spare pair of glasses, to create a DNA profile for her. Over time, it became increasingly clear that Kirk was directly involved in the kidnapping, making it highly unlikely that Masumi had run away from home. One day, a homeless man came to the police and shared that, while he was walking, he noticed a man digging near a parked white truck. When the homeless man asked what the man was doing, he replied that he was looking for a lost necklace, which seemed suspicious. The homeless man wrote down the truck's license plate number. After an investigation, it was confirmed that the license plate number belonged to Kirk's white Ford F-150. The police had two key pieces of information. A witness saw Kirk's truck near Masumi, and another witness confirmed that Kirk was digging near his car. However, this information alone was not strong enough to obtain a search warrant. Nevertheless, because Kirk had an outstanding traffic ticket, the police were permitted to seize both vehicles for a detailed examination. They also summoned Kirk for questioning, but he refused to answer any questions without a lawyer present. He subsequently took a polygraph test, which he failed. Fortunately for him, polygraph results are not legally admissible in court. The police understood that their best chance of arresting Kirk was to obtain a positive DNA match from his truck and Masumi's belongings. Unfortunately, the processing of the DNA samples took too long, compelling the police to release him. Ultimately, the police found key evidence inside Kirk's work truck. They discovered blood and glasses on the upholstery. A few days later, tests confirmed that the blood belonged to Masumi Watanabe, and the glasses found in the truck matched hers exactly. At this point, Masumi's case shifted from being classified as a missing persons case to a murder investigation. Kirk was arrested and charged with second-degree murder. During a subsequent interrogation, he changed his story, claiming that he had actually seen Masumi on the day of the incident. In this new account, he stated that he had accidentally hit her with his car, causing only minor injuries. He claimed he attempted to take her to the hospital, and she reportedly agreed. However, after driving a short distance, she suddenly jumped out of the truck. The car was traveling at over 40 miles per hour, resulting in Masumi hitting her head upon impact. Kirk attributed her strange behavior to their lack of communication. Citing her poor English as a contributing factor, he confessed that Masumi had been severely injured and died instantly after jumping from the vehicle, instead of calling the police. He hid her body in the back of his truck that evening. Kirk cleaned out the truck and returned home to have dinner with his wife and children. He then went to a store to make a purchase. Surveillance cameras recorded him at 2 stores buying gloves, a shovel, chlorine-based cleaner, and trash bags. He then transferred the body from the company truck to his own vehicle and drove out into the countryside. There, a homeless man saw him digging, supposedly looking for a necklace, but in reality, he was digging a grave to bury Masumi. When Kirk was discovered by the homeless man, he panicked. Instead of burying Masumi, as he had initially planned, he threw her body into the ocean. He later explained that he lied to the police because he was afraid of losing his job. In an interview, Kirk's live-in girlfriend mentioned that, after dinner on April 12, Kirk went out to work, and when he returned home, she noticed some stains on his clothes. Interestingly, Kirk's girlfriend later recanted her statement. However, the police returned to the burial site but found no evidence. Kirk's claim that he had abandoned his plan to bury the body there turned out to be correct. And, unfortunately, Masumi's body was never found. There was sufficient evidence to convict Kirk, including the testimony of several witnesses, a DNA match linking Masumi to Kirk's belongings, and Kirk's own statements. However, since there was no evidence of intentional conduct, it was challenging to charge him with first-degree murder. As a result, prosecutors decided to charge him with second-degree murder on March 4, 2008, nearly a year after Masumi's disappearance. The trial began. Kirk maintained that the incident was accidental, arguing that Masumi had jumped out of the moving truck on her own and that he was not responsible for her death. Kirk's parents attended the trial and insisted that their son was a good person who could never commit murder. They argued that he was the victim of a plot by the police. The prosecution believed that although Kirk had not planned the kidnapping or murder in advance, they also rejected his claim that the incident was accidental. Experts pointed out that if Kirk had actually hit Masumi with his car, his vehicle would have been damaged. However, upon examination, no such damage was found on the truck. Furthermore, the injuries the girl sustained must have been much more severe than Kirk described, making his entire testimony seem implausible. The police and Masumi's family believed that Kirk had buried her body nearby instead of throwing it into the sea. However, in court, Kirk insisted that he had thrown her body into the ocean. The police contended that if the body had indeed been thrown into the ocean, the tide would eventually wash it ashore, as they had seen in similar cases. Because Masumi's body was never found, the police could not determine the cause of her death or whether she had been abused. Masumi's parents attended the trial. At one point, Kirk told them that he had not tortured Masumi. However, her parents, like the prosecutors, did not believe him. Masumi's father stated that every night he heard Masumi's voice, calling for him to take her home. Masumi's mother expressed that the family would not find peace until they could bring their beloved daughter back to Japan and give her a proper burial. After reviewing the evidence presented in court, the jury deliberated for a day and a half. Ultimately, Kirk Langford was convicted of second-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison. This is one of the longest sentences in Hawaiian history. Kirk's appeal was denied. It is hard to describe the depth of pain her family and friends must have felt. Losing a child is one of the hardest experiences for any parent, especially when they cannot even lay their daughter to rest. Masumi was a shy, gentle girl with her whole life ahead of her. She was drawn to the Hawaiian Islands and loved them dearly. Tragically, what was once a true paradise for Masumi became her final resting place. After the verdict, Masumi's mother made an emotional plea. She bowed humbly before the court and begged Kirk to show them where the body was buried. Welcome back to our channel. Today, we will explore a new case, the case of John Allen Chow. We'll embark on a journey to the enigmatic North Sentinel Island in the Andaman Islands, India, to explore the lives of the Sentinelese. The island's inhabitants, they live in complete isolation from the modern world, maintaining a hunter-gatherer lifestyle that dates back tens of thousands of years. Known for their hostility towards outsiders, their language, beliefs, and social structure remain largely unknown, making them a symbol of prehistoric isolation. Tourism has been rapidly developing on the Andaman Islands, attracting visitors from around the world to experience its breathtaking natural beauty. Travelers come to admire the majestic mangrove forests, stroll through lush, tropical jungles, relax on pristine sandy beaches, and savor fresh local cuisine. However, let's turn our focus to North Sentinel Island. This isolated island spans nearly 60 square kilometers and has a roughly circular, shield-like shape. It typically enjoys bright sunshine, but also experiences seasonal winds and monsoons. Satellite images reveal that the island is surrounded by coral reefs and sandy beaches. Almost the entire island, apart from the coastline, is covered by dense tropical forest. Despite thousands of satellite images being taken, the thick forest canopy conceals anything beneath it. Adding to the island's enduring mystery, it is important to note that visiting North Sentinel Island has been strictly prohibited since 1956 under the Protection of Aboriginal Tribes Act for the Andaman and Nicobar Islands. It is illegal to approach the island. A restricted zone of 8 kilometers has been established around it. The Indian Coast Guard regularly patrols the surrounding waters, and anyone attempting to enter the island faces severe penalties, including heavy fines and imprisonment. Additionally, visiting many nearby islands also requires official permits. The Sentinelese remain isolated, fiercely defending their territory despite efforts to make contact. Nearly all attempts have failed. If someone were stranded on the island, Indian authorities would not intervene. Their population is estimated between 80 to 150 individuals. As no official count has been made, they rely on a diet of wild boar, fish, shellfish, and plants, avoiding contact with the outside world and fishing only within their lagoon. They remain within their reefs, fishing only in their lagoons, while they use canoes. These are limited to shallow waters, where they propel themselves forward with long poles that reach the seabed. So, the Sentinelese are believed to be unable to move in deep waters, as they have not developed the use of oars. Physically, they are distinctive, broad, muscular, and relatively short, with an average height of about 1.6 meters. None of them are obese. Interestingly, the Sentinelese place high value on metal during their rare interactions with the outside world. They have been seen using arrows with metal tips. In 1974, they took aluminum cookware left behind by the National Geographic Society. The first recorded observation of the Sentinelese occurred in 1771, when Indian sailors passing by noticed a fire on the island's shore. Almost a century later, in 1867, an Indian merchant ship ran aground on one of the island's reefs. The crew reached the shore in search of food and water, but after 3 days, they were attacked by a group of islanders. At the time, no one knew anything about the Sentinelese. In the end, the crew was rescued by a naval team in their rush to escape. The sailors abandoned the damaged vessel and fled to safety. In January 1880, British naval officer Maurice Vidal Portman led an expedition to North Sentinel Island to establish contact with the indigenous people. However, when his team arrived, they could not find any Sentinelese, as the inhabitants had seemingly hidden out of fear. The team followed trails that led to an abandoned village, but no one was there. After several days of fruitless searching, they finding abandoned villages and roads, his team captured 6 people, including an elderly man, a woman, and 4 children. The man and woman died of disease shortly after their arrival in Port Blair, and the children also began to fall ill. Portman hastily sent the children back to North Sentinel Island with a large supply of gifts in an attempt to establish friendly relations. Portman visited the island again in 1883, 1885, and 1887, but all were unsuccessful. In 1896, a prisoner escaped from the Great Andaman Island detention camp on a makeshift raft and drifted to North Sentinel Beach. His body was discovered by a search party a few days later with multiple arrow wounds and a cut throat. On August 2, 1981, the MV Primrose carrying a large cargo of chicken feed from Bangladesh to Australia, ran aground in rough seas near North Sentinel Island, trapping its small crew after several days. The captain sent a distress signal, reporting that more than 50 armed islanders were preparing boats to approach the ship. However, heavy waves prevented the islanders from reaching the vessel, and their arrows were deflected. The 31-member crew had to stay vigilant, armed with axes, pipes, and flare weapons. Nearly a week later, the crew was evacuated by a civilian helicopter chartered by the Oil and Natural Gas Corporation with the assistance of the Indian Navy. After the evacuation, the Sentinelese scavenged the abandoned shipwrecks for iron to use in making weapons. Muhammad, a scrap metal dealer contracted by the government to dismantle the Primrose, recorded friendly exchanges of fruit and small pieces of metal with the Sentinelese, who often approached the wreck at low tide. 2 days later, in the early morning, 3 Sentinelese canoes, carrying about a dozen men, approached the Primrose, initially apprehensive. The crew threw bananas to the islanders in an attempt to attract them and reduce the possibility of conflict over the next 18 months. The Sentinelese regularly visited the crew while they continued salvage work on the abandoned ship. In 1991, the first instances of peaceful contact with the Sentinelese were recorded during 2 regular expeditions conducted by an Indian anthropological team, which included representatives from various government agencies, as well as anthropologist Madhumala Chattopadhyay. This marked the first time a woman on an expedition made contact with the Sentinelese during the visit on January 4, 1991. The Sentinelese initially approached the team unarmed. They accepted the coconuts offered to them, but retreated when the team signaled for them to come closer. The team returned to the main ship, MV Tarmugli, and later returned to the island in the afternoon, where they found at least 24 Sentinelese on the beach. One of the men aimed a bow and arrow at the team, but a woman pushed the arrow down, prompting the man to bury his weapon in the sand. For the first time, the Sentinelese approached the boats quite closely. The tribal welfare director then personally handed over 5 bags of coconuts. In 1995, the Indian government decided not to forcibly contact or assimilate the Sentinelese into modern civilization. By 1996, all visits to North Sentinel Island were completely stopped. In 2004, a massive tsunami devastated the Indian Ocean region, displacing hundreds of thousands of people and claiming many lives. This natural disaster also significantly affected North Sentinel Island. Tectonic activity caused the island and nearby seabed to rise by almost 2 meters. This uplift exposed the surrounding coral reef, which dried out and eventually died. These changes are visible in satellite images starting in 2004. Following the tsunami, an Indian helicopter flew over the island to check if the Sentinelese needed assistance. The islanders, however, emerged and aimed their arrows at the helicopter, clearly signaling they wanted no contact. In 2018, John Allen Chow, a Christian missionary, attempted to visit North Sentinel Island. Believing he was uniquely capable of conquering its isolation, John was born on December 18, 1991, in Scottsboro, Alabama. His father, Patrick Chow, a Chinese-American psychiatrist, while his mother, Linda Adams Chow, was an organizer for Chi Alpha. John grew up in a warm and loving family with an older brother and sister. Both of his parents were devout Christians, contributing to their successful academic careers. While his siblings pursued college and careers in medicine, John chose a different path. He developed a strong passion for Christianity and travel. John loved outdoor activities and often went hiking with friends. From a young age, he dreamed of living on an uninhabited island, combining his passion for adventure and his faith. He decided to become a missionary. He traveled extensively, meeting people and spreading the Christian faith. At the age of 17, he learned about the isolated North Sentinel Island and its inhabitants. John believed he could help the Sentinelese by introducing them to Christianity and connecting them with God in 2015. John took his first trip to the Andaman Islands. Although he avoided getting too close to North Sentinel Island, he began studying the area, building connection, and preparing for a future mission. He returned home without visiting the island he had dreamed of, but resolved to go back. By 2016, John was living in California, working as a guide, and traveling across the United States. Next year, he also organized a missionary training camp to teach others how to engage with remote tribes. John became deeply fixated on North Sentinel Island and frequently discussed it with friends and family. He shared his plans to visit the island. John believed it was his divine mission to tell the Sentinelese about God and bring light to their dark world. In October 2018, John traveled to Port Blair to prepare for his trip to the island. He created picture cards for communication, collected gifts for the islanders, and bought medical supplies and other essential items to prioritize the safety of the Sentinelese to minimize health risks. He vaccinated himself against common viruses and self-quarantined for 11 days, despite efforts. John could not secure official permission, making his trip illegal under Indian law. Determined to proceed, he approached local fishermen and eventually convinced 3 of them to take him close to the island for $400 late on the night of November 14, 2018. The fishermen secretly took John aboard their motorboat and set out to sea. Their destination was about 60 miles away. By early morning on November 15, they reached the waters near North Sentinel Island, despite the fishermen's warnings. John left the boat, got into his canoe, and paddled alone toward the shore. As he approached, the Sentinelese noticed him while he was still in the water. They shouted in their language, clearly expressing their displeasure at the unexpected visitor. The islanders exchanged looks and then decided to defend their territory. They aimed their arrows at John, who panicked and quickly retreated to his canoe, paddling as fast as he could. He returned to the motorboat, narrowly escaping harm. Although terrified by the experience, John was deeply disappointed. His mission had failed, and all his efforts felt futile. The next day, John decided to return to the island. As he paddled toward the shore, he heard the cries of the islanders and the sound of drums. Soon, he noticed a man standing on a high coral reef. The man, his chest painted white, said something to John. In an attempt to communicate, John repeated the man's words and sang a prayer in response. The islander laughed loudly. Suddenly, more Sentinelese appeared on the shore. Gathering into a crowd, John offered them gifts, but 2 men dragged his canoe into the dense forest. At one point, a young islander aimed an arrow directly at him. Panicking, John held up his Bible. The arrow struck the Bible, sparing him. Startled and afraid, John fled into the water. He swam as fast as he could. Once he could no longer touch the sea floor. After swimming about a mile, he reached the fisherman's boat that had brought him to the island and managed to escape to safety. Disheartened, that day, he wrote in his journal, "Lord, is this island Satan's last stronghold, where none have heard or even had the chance to hear your name? The eternal lives of this tribe is at hand, and I think it's worthwhile to declare Jesus to these people. Please do not be angry at them or at God. If I get killed, don't retrieve my body." Early on the morning of November 17, John set out once more for the wild island, this time in a motorboat with the fishermen. Before switching to his canoe, he wrote in his journal, "I hope this is not my last entry, but if it is, glory to God." Wearing only black shorts, John climbed into his canoe and paddled alone toward North Sentinel Island. For the 3rd time, the fishermen stayed in the motorboat at sea with John's belongings, waiting for him until the afternoon. When John failed to return, they left and went home. The following day, the fishermen returned to the island to observe the shoreline from a distance and search for John. They noticed something unusual on the shore. As they looked closer, they realized it was a motionless man resembling John, dressed in black shorts. While they watched, The Sentinelese came on, dragged the body off the beach, and disappeared into the jungle. Frightened, the fishermen returned to Port Blair and informed John's family of his death. John's parents, friends, colleagues, and acquaintances were heartbroken. Though they understood the drastic decision he had made in pursuit of his missionary work, the authorities now faced two key questions: what steps to take next, and whether to attempt retrieving John's body to return it to his homeland. Upon examining John's journal, the police discovered an entry where he had written, "If it happens that I am killed, I ask that my body not be taken from the island." 3 days after John's death, his family shared a post on social network, announcing that John had died in India while engaging with the Sentinelese tribe on the Andaman Islands. Part of their message read, "We forgive those reportedly responsible for his death. He went to them willingly, and no one should face prosecution because of his actions." The authorities ultimately decided not to file any criminal charges. The fishermen who had transported John to the remote island were released on bail, despite several attempts by the Indian police to recover John's body. The operation was deemed too dangerous, and officials chose not to proceed. To this day, John's death has not been officially confirmed. His mother, Linda, continues to believe that her son is still alive and living on the island. She tells the media that John will return one day and share the truth himself. Meanwhile, his father, Patrick, holds the missionary organization responsible for John's death, accusing them of pressuring his son into taking such extreme risks and encouraging him to visit the perilous island. The future of the Sentinelese remains uncertain. Will they be able to preserve their way of life on their secluded island? In a way, their independence from the challenges of modern life could even inspire a sense of admiration. Welcome back to our channel. Today, we will explore a new case, the case of Ashley Fallis. Ashley Fallis married her high school sweetheart right after finishing school, but their marriage lasted only a few years. During that time, she had 2 daughters. When the relationship ended, Ashley, just over 20 years old, she returned to her hometown with her children to live near her mother, Jenna, and stepfather, Joel. She found work as a respiratory therapist, helping patients with breathing and heart issues, became the sole provider for her family. Life was difficult, as her ex-husband was not involved in raising their daughters. Despite these hardships, Ashley was described by her mother and stepfather as cheerful, kind, and funny. She and her mother were particularly close, sharing a bond like best friends. In April 2007, Ashley met Tom Fallis, who seemed responsible and ready for family life. Unlike her ex-husband, their relationship progressed quickly, and a few months later, Ashley became pregnant with her 3rd child. 9 months later, they welcomed a son, Blake. 2 weeks after Blake's birth, Ashley and Tom got married. Tom also adopted Ashley's older daughters, however. Ashley's mother and stepfather felt she had rushed into having another child, like marrying Tom and entrusting him with her daughters despite knowing him for only a short time. The family settled in Evans, a small town about an hour north of Denver, Colorado. Ashley continued her work as a respiratory therapist, while Tom took a job as a correctional officer with the Weld County Sheriff's Office. Jenna admitted she found Tom strange from the start. She said, "I didn't like his mindset. He always thought he was right about everything." Tom came across as aggressive, hot-tempered, and controlling toward Ashley. Jenna often tried to convince Ashley to leave her relationship with Tom. Things took a dramatic turn when their youngest son, Blake, was diagnosed with hydrocephalus, a condition causing fluid to build up in the brain. Ashley became focused on researching treatment options for Blake, who had to undergo several major surgeries and required constant care. The stress severely affected Ashley, leaving her depressed, anxious, and irritable. Caring for Blake's health also put a heavy strain on Ashley and Tom's relationship, leading to frequent arguments. By the summer of 2011, Ashley started contemplating divorce. However, Tom encouraged her to seek help from from a psychotherapist after starting medication. Ashley's mental health improved, and their relationship appeared to stabilize by December 2011. The Fallis family decided to host a New Year's Eve party at their home, inviting family and friends. The preparations for the holiday provided a much distraction from their challenges. Just a few days before the celebration, Ashley discovered she was pregnant again. Filled with joy, she chose to stop taking her medication to protect the baby for a brief moment. It seemed things were improving for the Fallis family, and thoughts of divorce faded away. Unfortunately, their happiness was short-lived. On the afternoon of December 31, 2011, Ashley started bleeding and feared she was having a miscarriage. Despite her worry, she continued getting ready for the party. That evening, guests started arriving at the Fallis' home, including Tom's parents, Ashley's mother and stepfather, her uncle, and several family friends. The atmosphere was lively as everyone enjoyed chatting and celebrating together. However, tension between Tom and Ashley became evident. They exchanged harsh remarks and occasionally argued during the evening. Ashley confided in a friend, saying she always knew that Tom hates her. Despite the conflict, Ashley and Tom still celebrated the new year with their guests as the party wound down and people began leaving. Ashley's uncle offered her illegal substances. Tom overheard this and became enraged. He scolded Ashley and accused her of unacceptable behavior. In the heat of the argument, Tom revealed to everyone that Ashley's fourth pregnancy had ended earlier that day. He shouted that Ashley always followed her mother's advice rather than thinking for herself. After the quarrel, Ashley went to put her children to bed while her parents prepared to leave at 12:40 a.m. Ashley stepped outside to say goodbye to her mother and stepfather, noticing that Ashley seemed upset. Her mother, Jenna, asked what was wrong. Ashley responded, "It's okay, Mom, it's just Tom. He's like that." She hugged her parents goodbye while Tom stood on the porch, waving as they drove away. Afterward, Ashley and Tom went back inside the house, where the atmosphere was tense, following a brief argument about illegal substances. The two went their separate ways. Tom went into the wardrobe to change when he suddenly heard the sound of a weapon being loaded in the bedroom. Knowing Ashley kept a weapon under her mattress, Tom shouted, asking what was going on, and hurried toward the bedroom. Before he could reach her, he heard the explosion. Tom rushed into the room and found Ashley lying on the floor, smoke lingering in the air. She had been injured in the back of the head. In a panic, Tom grabbed her, pressed his hand against the wound to stop the bleeding, and called 911 at 12:50 a.m. as Ashley lay unconscious but still alive. Tom gently closed her eyes and spoke to her, saying, "I'm here. You won't go. You won't leave me." In the early hours of New Year's Day, 2012, the Evans Police Department responded to an emergency call from the Fallis family home. The neighborhood was known to be safe, with low crime rates. Upon arrival, paramedics rushed Ashley to the hospital due wound to her head. Unfortunately, her injuries were critical, and Ashley passed away a few hours later. The police detained Tom at the scene. He was covered in blood and claimed that his wife had self-harm. He also mentioned that Ashley and her mother had attended a party earlier that evening, and Ashley had been very upset, however. Suspicions quickly arose when a neighbor reported hearing screams from the house. The neighbor stated she heard Ashley screaming, begging Tom to get off her and let her go. During his interrogation, Tom denied the accusations. He stated that he did not witness his wife pulling the trigger and denied assaulting her. At any time during the interrogation, investigators asked Tom to undress so they could examine his body. They found fresh scratches on his chest. Tom explained the scratches by claiming he had injured himself while shaving his chest for the first time, which caused itching. Throughout the questioning, Tom appeared visibly nervous and anxious, but consistently denied having any physical contact with Ashley. In the Fallis bedroom, significant evidence suggested that a conflict had occurred. Photographs had been torn off the wall, hinting at a fight, and divorce papers were found displayed on the wall. Ashley also had bruises on her legs, according to Ashley's mother. Tom had been very angry with them when they said goodbye at the party. At the end of the party, he even shouted, "I want you all to die." Despite this evidence, Tom was released without charges. After the interrogation, Ashley's parents were heartbroken and couldn't understand why he was released so easily. Jenna was convinced that her daughter would never willingly leave her children. Ashley loved life and had plans for the future. On January 5, 2012, the medical examiner concluded that Ashley had died from a weapon wound to the back of the head and ruled it self-harm. 2 months later, the case was officially closed. Ashley's grieving parents struggled to accept this conclusion. Eventually, Tom and his children moved to Indiana, where he pursued graduate school. Despite their suspicions, Ashley's parents tried to maintain a good relationship with Tom to stay connected with their grandchildren. However, they never stopped believing that their daughter's death was caused by Tom. 2 years passed until, in early 2014, a local television reporter, Justin Joseph, began his own investigation into the Ashley Fallis case. Joseph spent months interviewing neighbors and investigating the case. After 4 months, the case took a significant turn. A young neighbor of Tom, his name is Nick Glover, revealed an important detail to Joseph. Nick and his mother, Kathy Glover, claimed he heard Tom yelling at his parents outside the house, saying, "God, I can't believe I did this," when his parents asked, "What are you saying?" Tom reportedly yelled, "I attacked her." Nick had informed the police immediately after the tragedy, and his statement was written down. However, no mention of Nick Glover's and Kathy account was found in the official police report. Joseph's report also uncovered another person who confirmed that Tom had confessed. A local police was present at the scene of the tragedy stated that Tom admitted to attack Ashley. Another neighbor also told the reporter that, on the night of the incident, she had called to the police, saying Tom attacked his wife. However, the police report misrepresented this information, stating instead that a woman had called to report that Ashley had self-harm. She also told the police that she had heard Ashley screaming from the Fallis family home, saying, "Leave me alone." Despite this, at that time, the neighbor was not questioned further, which was considered a serious omission since she was a key witness that night. Ashley's parents believed the police had rushed to close the case and blamed Ashley for her own death. Despite the circumstantial evidence, thanks to Joseph's investigative work, Chief Rick Brandt began to reevaluate the case and the actions of his officers, who had quickly hushed it up. This time, the Fort Collins Police Department took over the investigation. They considered the testimonies of the neighbors who heard Ashley screaming. Tom continued to deny his involvement in Ashley's death, maintaining that she had pulled the trigger herself on New Year's Eve. Curiously, more than 2 years after Ashley's death, Tom handed over to the police what he claimed was a suicide note written by Ashley. The note read, "Dear Tom, I am sorry for your pain. I am a loser in everything. I don't even love my daughters and son. I love you, but I just can't stand this life anymore." In November 2014, Tom Fallis was charged with the death of Ashley Fallis. He was detained and arrested in Indiana after 3 years of freedom, thinking he had escaped justice. In March 2016, a trial was held against Tom. During the trial, Tom's lawyer argued that he could not have killed his beloved wife, the mother of his 3 children. The lawyer claimed that Ashley had been struggling with mental health issues. He presented documents showing that Ashley had been diagnosed with a mental illness in the summer of 2011. The defense argued that she was impulsive, prone to self-destruction, and had been very drunk on the night of her death. They also claimed that she had suffered a miscarriage on New Year's Eve, further contributing to her distress. Ashley's uncle, however, stated that their family did not believe Ashley had taken her self-harm. They were convinced that Tom was responsible for her death. Ashley's therapist also insisted that his patient had no self-destructive tendencies. He confirmed that she was taking certain medications. However, the doctor did not know that. In addition to them, she was prescribed prescription medicine from other specialists. Ashley apparently hid another important thing from the doctor. information, including the alleged suicide notes she wrote. It turned out that Ashley had written 2 similar notes, one of which was dated July 24, 2011. Ashley's mother, Jenna, insisted that her daughter was fine. But Tom behaved inappropriately that night. He was overly angry and aggressive toward her and toward Ashley. Jenna said that at the end of the party, she watched as Tom walked up the stairs, stood right in front of Ashley, and told Ashley, "I hate you all, and I wish you all died." Then he went into the bedroom and slammed the door loudly. Rick also testified at the trial, confirming that he heard Tom confess to his parents that he attacked his wife. However, his parents denied this information and fully supported their son. A forensic expert who spent 400 hours studying the case explained to the jury where Ashley's head should have been when the explosion rang out. The expert claimed Ashley pulled the trigger herself. The prosecution called a second world-renowned forensic expert, who told the jury that he had come to the opposite conclusion from the previous medical examiner. In his opinion, Tom was next to Ashley at the time of the explosion, and most likely, there was a struggle between the spouses for the weapon, in which Tom won. The jury took only 3.5 hours to reach their verdict. Tom was found not guilty of second-degree murder and of all less serious crimes. Tom was free again. He refused to give any comments to journalists and the media. The jury explained that they believed that Ashley was mentally ill, which is why she self-harmed. Ashley's parents still don't believe that their daughter could abandon 3 children and voluntarily end her life. They are very upset that Tom was released. Ashley's 2 daughters and son remained under the care of Tom and live in Indiana, and Ashley's parents, Jenna and Joel, received the legal right to see their grandchildren. Welcome back to our channel. Today, we will explore a new case, the case of Carla Faye Tucker. The events began on the morning of June 13, 1983, when the Texas Police Department responded to an urgent call from a man. Officers were dispatched to a house in the northeastern part of the city. Inside, they discovered the bodies of a man and a woman who had been brutally killed with a pickaxe. Initially, investigators suspected the murders were the result of a robbery gone wrong, but the sheer savagery of the crime made this theory unlikely. Once the victims' identities were confirmed and their backgrounds investigated, new revelations emerged that drastically changed the direction of the case. Houston, Texas, with a population of over 1 million, is the largest city in the region and the hub of Harris County. It is home to people of various religions and cultural backgrounds who live together in this diverse community. However, as the population grows, so does the crime rate, and Houston is now ranked among the top 100 most dangerous cities in America. On the morning of June 13, 1983, a man waited for his colleague, Jerry Lynn Dean, to pick him up for work. Jerry, however, never arrived. They had recently signed a contract for a security system installation job, and he knew Jerry was not the type to miss work without a good reason, since they lived close to each other. He decided to check on Jerry after waiting for some time, assuming his colleague might have overslept. When Gregory reached Jerry's apartment, he noticed the door was slightly open. He stepped inside and called out for Jerry, but received no response. He found the TV and the sound system were tangled together, and Jerry's motorcycle, which Jerry had been working on, was gone. Concerned, he began searching all over the apartment. Eventually, he opened the door to the guest bedroom. Little did he know that he was about to discover something horrifying. Jerry was found lying on the floor next to the bed, surrounded by a pool of blood. On the bed was a woman unfamiliar to he, with a pickaxe lodged in her chest. Horrified by the gruesome scene, he fled the apartment and went straight home to call the police. When the police arrived at the apartment, they observed that the space was in disarray, with tools, motorcycle parts, and dirty clothes scattered across the floor. In the guest bedroom, they discovered the bodies of Jerry and the unknown woman. The officers documented the crime scene, including the pickaxe, which was identified as the murder weapon One officer removed the pickaxe from the woman's chest and placed it aside for collection as evidence. The bodies were sent to the Harris County Medical Examiner's office for autopsy. During questioning, the colleague said to the investigators that the apartment door had been open when he arrived, and the interior looked as though someone had ransacked it. He also noticed that Jerry's motorcycle and blue Chevrolet El Camino pickup truck were missing. A search of the apartment revealed that both victims' wallets had also disappeared. Additionally, investigators discovered that the bird hammer used in the attack was taken from Jerry's toolkit. The detectives found no evidence of forced entry into the apartment. Neighbors mentioned hearing loud noises from the apartment early in the morning, but did not call the police, as they neither heard cries for help nor explosion and assumed nothing serious had occurred. Investigators theorized that the perpetrator was either someone the victims knew and willingly let in, or someone who entered through a door that was accidentally unlocked. Meanwhile, the severity of the attack pointed to the possibility of a premeditated murder. The autopsy revealed that Jerry sustained 28 pickaxe wounds, a head injury caused by a blunt object striking the back of his skull through fingerprints. The police identified Deborah Ruth Thornton as the second victim. She suffered 15 pickaxe wounds to her head and chest, with a fatal strike piercing her heart. After ruling out random theft, investigators turned their attention to the victim's close contacts. Jerry had met Deborah just the day before at a pool party. This was the first time they had met. Friends at the party stated that Deborah had attended to relax and escape her personal problems. Further inquiries revealed that Deborah was married and had 2 children. So, suspicion first fell on her husband. The husband was questioned and told investigators that on the evening of June 12, he had been at home with his children. He acknowledged that he and his wife had been having misunderstandings recently, but insisted he loved her and would never harm her. He claimed to know nothing about Deborah's infidelity and said he had never heard of a man named Jerry before. Investigators confirmed the husband's alibi and ruled him out as a suspect afterward. They learn of another person who may have held a grudge: Deborah's father, William. William had a criminal past, including a conviction for assault, for which he had served time. He currently owned a large business in Texas, but was under investigation for tax evasion. Further investigation revealed that Deborah had once been called to testify in court against her father, which could have provided a motive for murder. William was questioned, but he denied any involvement in the crime. Investigators kept him under surveillance for several weeks, but found no evidence connecting him to the double murder. Another team of investigators began looking into Jerry's past, uncovering that he, too, was surrounded by complex relationships. Jerry worked as a mechanic, and among those who knew him, a woman named Carla Faye Tucker. Carla, known for her love of partying, had a strained relationship with Jerry. The tension started when Carla first met Jerry, the boyfriend of Sean. From the start, she had a poor impression of him. She thought he was weak and unsuitable for her best friend. Their conflict escalated after an incident at Carla's apartment. Jerry had parked his motorcycle in her living room, and oil leaked from the bike, staining her carpet. Furious, Carla eventually kicked Jerry out of her apartment that night. In the months that followed, their animosity deepened. One day, when Carla and Sean planned a trip to see their favorite bands, Jerry became very upset. He found Carla's photo album and cut out all her pictures, including the only photo she had with her mother. This act infuriated Carla, and she tried to persuade Sean to end her relationship with Jerry. However, instead of separating, Sean and Jerry moved in together and got married. Despite everything, Carla remained convinced that her friend had made a mistake by choosing Jerry. A month after the wedding, Sean visited Carla's house to collect a jacket. During the visit, Carla mentioned that she no longer wanted to see Jerry. Upon hearing that Jerry had parked outside near her house, Carla stormed outside, confronted him, hit him in the face, and broke his glasses. This incident led to Jerry being taken to the hospital to remove glass fragments from his eye. In June of the same year, Sean and Jerry separated, citing accusations of domestic violence and clashing lifestyles. In retaliation, for the alleged abuse she claimed to have suffered. Sean withdrew a large sum of money from Jerry's account and went shopping with Carla. After hearing this, Jerry allegedly began plotting his revenge. Rumors circulated that he had hired someone to attack Carla, intending to disfigure her. Their volatile relationship quickly attracted the attention of investigators. Carla was born on November 18, 1959, in Houston, Texas. To Larry and Carolyn, she had two much older sisters who were said to have negatively influenced her. This influence contributed to Carla starting to smoke at just 8 years old. When she was 10, her parents divorced, and she discovered that Larry was not her biological father. By the age of 12, Carla had begun use with banned substance and lived loosely with men. At 14, she dropped out of school and, following her mother's example, started working as an escort. Carolyn even taught Carla how to use her body to earn money. Around this time, Carla's sister introduced her to men who frequented biker clubs. Carla and her mother also became passionate fans of rock music and began traveling with music groups, embracing a carefree and unconventional lifestyle. Carla adapted quickly to this new way of living. At 16, she met Stephen Griffith, a laborer, and the two planned to marry. However, Carla found married life overwhelming. They frequently argued, and their fights often turned physical. Stephen even told his friends that Carla could hit harder than any man he knew. After 2 years of constant conflict, they decided to separate, and Carla returned to her previous lifestyle. When Carla was 20, Carolyn passed away. By that time, Carla had returned to spending time in biker clubs. It was during this period that she became close friends with Sean Dean. Their bond grew strong. The detectives questioned Carla. She admitted to having disagreements with Jerry, but denied any involvement in the crime. Carla allowed the police to take her fingerprints and initially agreed to a polygraph test, but later refused it after her boyfriend advised against it. The fingerprints provided no useful leads, as experts couldn't find viable evidence at the crime scene or on the murder weapon. However, Carla's sudden refusal to take a lie detector test made the detectives even more suspicious of her. Even so, this was not enough to add Carla or Sean to the list of suspects. Detectives continued visiting them regularly, hoping one of them would slip up. Carla appeared completely unbothered and carried on with her life, attending parties as usual. Weeks passed, and detectives still could not find any evidence linking of them. A detective from the homicide department took an interest in the case after hearing the name Daniel Ryan Garrett. Carla's boyfriend, the detective, had grown up in the same neighborhood as Daniel and also acquainted with Daniel's ex-wife. The detective contacted Daniel's ex-wife and asked if she had any information about Daniel or Carla's potential involvement in the Houston double murder. She confessed that she had not seen her ex-husband for a long time and expressed a desire to talk to him about it. On July 18, 1983, the Houston Police Department received an urgent call, judging by the voice on the other end of the line. The caller sounded extremely nervous. He demanded to speak specifically to this detective. It was Daniel's brother, and he claimed to have information about the murder. Daniel's brother confessed that he had kept this information a secret for 5 weeks. He also mentioned a third individual, James Leibrandt, a friend of his, who was present at Jerry's house on the night of the incident. He warned that the situation was escalating because Carla had been talking about killing one of the witnesses to silence them. During his interrogation, he said that early in the morning of June 13, Daniel and Carla arrived at his house in a blue pickup truck. Carla bragged that she had taken care of Jerry and an unidentified woman, and both of them asked him to help destroy the evidence. Initially, he hesitated to get involved, but ultimately decided to assist. He burned Jerry's wallet in an ashtray, and the stolen motorcycle parts were dumped into a nearby ditch. On July 20, 1983, Daniel's brother rode a motorcycle to Carla's house with a transmitter hidden under his shirt and a recorder concealed in his shoe. The detective and the investigative team listened from a surveillance van parked a block away. Daniel's brother casually started the conversation, carefully guiding it toward the topic of the killing. Ultimately, the suspect, Carla, provided a detailed account of what happened on the night of June 12. Carla had organized a birthday party for her sister. The celebration lasted the entire weekend, with friends coming and going, drinking alcohol, and using banned substance, which were plentiful in the house by Sunday evening, when only James, Daniel, and Carla remained. She told Daniel that she felt overwhelmed with emotions and energy. The three of them began discussing a planned crime, and Carla suggested stealing Jerry's motorbike and selling it for parts to make money. She expressed her deep hatred for Jerry and said she wanted to make him pay for everything he had done to her and Sean. Around 3 a.m. they went to Jerry's house. They entered without any trouble because Carla had stolen an extra set of keys several weeks earlier. At the time, she didn't know why she had taken the keys, but they ended up being crucial on the night of the murder. During a recorded conversation, Daniel's brother asked if they had planned to kill anyone when they entered the house. Carla replied no, explaining that everything had happened spontaneously at the time. Carla was intoxicated and under the influence of banned substance. She sat on top of Jerry as he woke up. Trying to restrain him, Jerry attempted to free himself by grabbing her hands, but at that moment, Daniel struck him multiple times in the head with a hammer while in her drunken and drugged state. Carla became irritated by the gurgling sounds Jerry, who was dying, was making in a fit of rage. She grabbed a pickaxe and struck his body with it. Carla later admitted that using the flat side of the pickaxe gave her a feeling of arousal. Daniel struck the final, deadly blow to Jerry's head with the hammer and then left the room. At that moment, Carla noticed a woman hidden under a blanket in the corner of the bed. Up to that point, she had been so focused on Jerry that she hadn't realized someone else was there. Carla and the woman began to struggle. Their fight continued until Daniel returned, overcome by rage. Carla attacked the woman repeatedly with the pickaxe, eventually driving it straight into her heart. Daniel was arrested just a block from his home while heading to work. At the same time, armed police officers entered Carla's house to take her into custody. James Leibrandt, who was visiting Carla as a guest, was also arrested at the police station. All of Carla's friends were questioned. They shared what they knew, providing consistent accounts, and all noted that Carla had always disliked Jerry. However, both Carla and Daniel remained silent during questioning. Carla claimed she had been drugged and could not remember anything about that night during the investigation. Leibrandt cooperated with authorities and testified against Carla and Daniel. He claimed that after using the banned substance, he felt restless and needed something to relieve himself, leading to his involvement in the theft scheme ultimately resulted in Leibrandt receiving a light sentence. Carla and Daniel were charged with the murders of Jerry and Deborah. Both were held in Harris County Jail without bail. In September 1983, they appeared in court, but their trials were held separately. Carla faced charges for both murders, while Daniel, after testifying at a hearing, had the charge for Deborah's murder dropped. Carla pleaded not guilty and remained in jail awaiting her trial. During her detention, jail staff reported that Carla behaved defiantly and provocatively. Everything changed, however, while awaiting trial. She began to recover from the effects of alcohol and banned substance. She started reading books from the prison library and, for the first time in her life, picked up a Bible. Later, Carla admitted to her cellmates and the staff that it was during this time she began to understand the consequences of her actions. She started attending Alcoholics Anonymous meetings, where she met others whose lives had been destroyed by these toxic things. Inspired by their stories, Carla created her own Bible study group and resolved to become a better person. When Carla repented, she realized that the Lord forgives those who are lost. She came to believe that holding on to guilt and failing to seek forgiveness blocks one's connection to God and fills life with bitterness. Feeling forgiven by the Lord, Carla's heart became filled with love, which she believed should guide her life. In 1984, Carla stood trial for the murder of Jerry and Deborah. She explained that, at the time of the crime, she was heavily under the influence of banned substance and alcohol. Carla said that the murder was not planned, but occurred as a sudden outburst of anger during a robbery. Fueled by the substances she had consumed, several witnesses for the defense supported her lawyers, arguing that Carla and Daniel, on that night, were unable to distinguish right from wrong. However, the jury could not reach a unanimous verdict on her guilt. Carla was given the chance to testify on her own behalf before the judge made the final decision. She spoke for nearly 5 hours, sharing details about her past and stating that only after being imprisoned did she fully understand her actions, despite her emotional testimony. Carla was ultimately sentenced to death by lethal injection, becoming the only woman in Texas to receive this punishment. In November 1984, Carla testified at Daniel's trial, hoping he would not be convicted. However, he was also sentenced to death. That marked the last time Carla and Daniel saw each other, while the legal system labeled Carla a murderer. Many saw her as a symbol of reform, initially resigned to her fate of dying by lethal injection. Carla's outlook changed in 1993 when she learned that Daniel, who was awaiting execution, had died of liver disease. This motivated her to fight for her own life with the support of a prison chaplain. She began the process of appealing her case. Carla appealed to have her death sentence reduced to life imprisonment. Her request gained support from notable figures, including Pope John Paul II, the Prime Minister of Italy, Romano Prodi, U.S. House Speaker Newt Gingrich, and televangelist Pat Robertson. Surprisingly, Ronald Carlson, the brother of the victims, Deborah, also supported clemency after witnessing Carla's transformation during her time in prison. Even Hans, the warden of the Huntsville's prison, testified that Carla had been an exemplary inmate. The decision now rested with the Texas Board of Pardons and Paroles, which was responsible for recommending whether her death sentence should be commuted. However, the final authority belonged to Governor Texas George W. Bush. On January 28, 1998, the board rejected Carla's request. In response, she wrote a letter to Governor Bush, acknowledging her actions as acts of extreme cruelty and recounting her journey of transformation. Despite her plea, the governor denied her final appeal just hours before her execution, refusing to commute her death sentence to life imprisonment. On February 2, 1998, Carla requested a peach, a banana, and a salad with dressing as her last meal, according to prison authorities. She spent the morning with her family from 8 a.m. to noon. While many hoped her final hours would remain peaceful, others anticipated that the day would be emotionally difficult for all involved until the very end. People awaited the governor's decision. Would he grant her mercy? On February 3, 1998, Carla Tucker was executed by lethal injection in Texas. She had requested the presence of her sister, Kari Weeks, and some friends during her final moments at 6:45 p.m., 8 minutes after the injection. She was pronounced dead. Carla was the first woman to be executed in Texas in 135 years since the reinstatement of the death penalty. Carla was buried at Forest Park, Lawndale Cemetery in Houston later. Accusations arose against Governor Bush, alleging that he lacked compassion for Carla during the appeals process. In response, Bush issued a statement expressing that he had forgiven her, but emphasized that justice still needed to be served for the 2 lives she had taken. Carla inspired the creation of several fictional characters in stories that explored her troubled upbringing and how it eventually led to her crimes. Fred Allen, the execution team's captain, revealed that overseeing Carla's execution caused him deep emotional turmoil. He later resigned from his role in the Texas prison system and became a vocal critic of the death penalty. Allen argued that no one has the moral right to take another person's life, even if it is sanctioned by the law. He also shared that when Carla was brought in, he realized she was the first woman scheduled for execution, and he vividly remembered the details of that day. Carla looked at him and said, "Thank you, Alan, for everything you are doing." Alan replied, "You're welcome," and fastened the safety strap. Other members of the team carried out the necessary procedures, and everything proceeded as expected. When Carla was pronounced dead, Alan and the others placed her body on the stretcher, removed the straps, and went about their usual tasks. However, shortly afterward, Alan suddenly imagined the pain Carla must have felt. He broke into a cold sweat, began trembling, and burst into tears. It was a deeply shocking experience for him. The changes Carla underwent in prison profoundly affected many who had initially seen her as nothing more than an antisocial individual. Hello again, true crime fans. We've got another mysterious case to explore. The case of Manijay Staran. Manijay Staran was born on May 23, 1989. Little is known about her childhood, except that she had an older brother by the age of 34. She was living in a small apartment and struggling financially. She also dealt with mental health issues. Manijay worked hard to overcome these challenges to create a safe and comfortable environment for her children. But it was a difficult journey. Her relatives had to help care for her children. Her life continued without major changes until something unexpected happened. On May 1, 2023, the St. Paul police received a disturbing call from Manijay's father. He had last spoken to her on April 23, and she seemed very scared. He believed that she was afraid of her boyfriend. The police began searching for her, but did not find her in her apartment. A man who claimed to be the father of one of Manijay's children also reported that he had not heard from her for a long time. It was unusual for her to go silent for so long, as she was in regular contact with him because they had a child together, according to him. Their last conversation had been on April 21, 2023. The police also spoke with a neighbor of Manijay's who had disturbing information. One day, she noticed a bruise under Manijay's eye and a red mark on her neck. When the neighbor asked if she had been attacked, Manijay confirmed that she had. The neighbor suggested calling the police, but Manijay begged her not to, fearing it would make things worse. This allegation of assault further complicated the investigation and added to the complexity of Manijay's situation. A number of important pieces of information were uncovered, revealing that Manijay had a boyfriend named Joseph Stephen Jorgensen, who frequently visited her apartment, although his last name was not listed on the lease. The manager provided the police with his phone number. It was confirmed that the phone number belonged to Joseph, a man in his 40s. The manager identified him in a photo, confirming that he was the one who had visited Manijay. This discovery was a major development in the case. The police obtained recordings from surveillance cameras located near the apartment, which provided crucial evidence. At 6 p.m. on April 23, the cameras recorded Manijay, clearly upset. Hurriedly leaving her apartment, she was quickly tackled by Joseph, who pulled her inside. This is the last recorded footage. Video analysis showed Joseph frequently entering and exiting the apartment between April 21 and April 28. The manager raised concerns when he mentioned that there was only one set of keys for residents, despite the footage clearly showing Joseph using his own key to open the door each time. At approximately 5 p.m. on April 28, Joseph was caught on camera leaving the apartment with a suitcase and a duffel bag. He loaded the luggage into a pickup truck and drove away quickly. Police later discovered that the truck belonged to a resident of the apartment building. Police also spoke with a friend of Manijay, who had valuable information about her lifestyle and her relationship with Joseph. The friend explained that although Manijay struggled with drug addiction, she always kept in touch with her family and never went more than a day without contacting them. Therefore, her absence for several days raised alarms. The friend also recounted a phone conversation with Joseph after Manijay went missing. Joseph claimed that Manijay went to the store but did not return, according to the family friend. Joseph expressed concern that a man named Kyle might pose a threat to Manije. After Manije went missing, Joseph took no action. He did not report her absence to the police and continued with his daily life. He was the last person to be in the apartment before she went missing. Concerned and with mounting evidence, police entered Manije's apartment with the building manager and quickly discovered alarming signs. The bedroom window was broken. In the living room, they found a television with a severely cracked screen, which the manager confirmed had never been damaged before. As they continued their search, police found broken glass on the microwave, with shards scattered throughout the bedroom. The mattress had a large hole in it, and there were red marks on the bed, which raised suspicions. The anxiety surrounding Manije's disappearance grew, revealing a troubling array of evidence. On May 25, after completing the necessary legal procedures, officers obtained a search warrant and processed Manije's apartment for vital evidence. Experts discovered a disturbing scene. There was a large amount of blood in the living room and kitchen, especially on the sofa and floor. Police confirmed that efforts had been made to clean up the scene. It was clear that someone had been seriously injured or possibly dead in the apartment. Preliminary analysis confirmed that blood samples taken from the scene belonged to Manije. As officers continued their investigation, they uncovered important information about her finances. They discovered that she had received government assistance in Minnesota through electronic benefit transfers, which allow recipients to make purchases directly at retail stores. Police quickly realized the significance of this discovery and obtained a warrant to access Manije's account records. They found a series of transactions made after her disappearance. One notable transaction occurred on May 9, 2023, when Joseph used Manije's card to withdraw cash from a highway ATM that same day. He made a purchase at a store, buying items such as a cleaning bucket, 2 boxes of paper towels, trash bags, liquid detergent, gloves, and disinfectant wipes. The strange combination of items aroused the police's suspicions. On May 11, Joseph used Manije's card again, this time at a grocery store. He also went to a hardware store, where he purchased more paper towels, cleaning supplies, and disinfectant wipes. The repeated purchases of these items further raised concerns about Joseph's actions and intentions. Police obtained a warrant to access information associated with Joseph's Google account. After reviewing the data, they discovered a series of significant internet searches made by him. On May 1, he searched for how to report a missing person. On May 3, Joseph searched for methods to delete files. On May 23, he inquired about removing Jeeps from a scooter. Finally, on June 4, he read about lime for soil. It is important to note that lime is a substance that can accelerate the decomposition of a body and eliminate the associated odor. The investigation team was aware of this, raising their concerns about Joseph's potential involvement in Manije's disappearance. With compelling evidence against him, they obtained a search warrant for his home. On June 26, a special weapons and tactics team arrived at Joseph's home, prepared for a potentially dangerous situation. When police confronted him in the apartment, he resisted and barricaded himself in his bedroom, shocking everyone present. He lit a fire to escalate the situation. The special weapons and tactics team proceeded with extreme caution, but were unable to apprehend him. He resisted aggressively and even attempted to grab one of the officers' weapons. Joseph was eventually restrained and taken to a local hospital for evaluation to rule out any mental health issues that might have influenced his behavior at the time of his arrest. There were 2 other people in the apartment, including an unidentified woman. She was injured, with bruises, scratches, and a red mark on her neck. The woman later reported to the police that Joseph had choked her and threatened her with violence, claiming that the neighbors would not hear her screams. The second person living in the apartment was Joseph's roommate. When the task force arrived, he hid in his bedroom, where he was discovered and arrested. He later informed the St. Paul Police Department that he had suffered a traumatic brain injury, which had resulted in a loss of smell. He also mentioned his long-standing relationship with Joseph and explained that Due to his busy Monday through Friday work schedule, he rarely interacted with Joseph or the women Joseph brought to the apartment. The roommate also noted that he had only met Manija once or twice and emphasized that he did not have a close relationship with her. When the roommate asked Joseph about Manija's whereabouts, Joseph told him that she had been admitted to a psychiatric hospital. The man also admitted that he had used Manija's money. Joseph had given him her card and PIN, leading him to believe that he had access to the account. Police interviewed the manager of the residential complex where Joseph lived. He reported that on May 15 or 16, 2023, residents complained about a foul odor coming from Joseph's apartment. The manager noted that it resembled the stench of a dead animal. To determine the source of the odor, on May 18, the manager and a maintenance worker attempted to enter Joseph's apartment to investigate. However, Joseph acted aggressively and blocked their path. The manager then instructed Joseph and his roommate to clean the apartment and gave them a week to do so. Shortly thereafter, both the manager and maintenance staff saw Joseph carrying large black duffel bags out of the apartment. The sight shocked witnesses, who began to speculate about what might be in the bags. The forensic team from the St. Paul Police Department conducted an investigation of Joseph's apartment. During the search, they discovered more evidence. Their report noted a significant amount of blood in the bathroom and in his closet. There was a foul odor in his home that matched the odors reported by residents. They also discovered other biological material found in the home. After arresting Joseph, the police accessed Jeep's data from his phone, which pointed to a storage facility where Joseph rented a room with a refrigerator through his roommate. Realizing the importance of this clue, they obtained a search warrant for the storage facility. On June 28, the police began investigating the location. As they approached the storage facility, they immediately smelled a very unpleasant odor. The police decided to cut the lock to gain access. Once inside, they discovered containers wrapped in plastic, a blue gym bag, and a small suitcase. Notably, one of these bags was similar to the one Joseph was seen carrying out of Manija's apartment in the surveillance footage. They also found a green bag containing cleaning products similar to those Joseph had previously purchased, sitting on top of the refrigerator. On the advice of forensic experts, the police carefully removed the containers and sports bags from the refrigerator, from which the foul odor was emanating. The contents were inaccessible until they were sent to the medical examiner for further analysis. After X-rays were taken, it was discovered that all of the containers contained human remains. The Office of the Chief Medical Examiner then conducted an autopsy and determined that all of the body parts were carefully packaged, wrapped in multiple layers of paper, film, and bags. Opening these packed remains was a laborious process. Tests confirmed that the remains belonged to Manija Starin. With identification made through her tattoos and dental records, the police again reviewed surveillance footage from Manija's home. Focusing on the bags Joseph carried, he had handling of the body Manija's in her apartment. Sorting her remains into different bags and carrying them out, Joseph faces multiple charges, including second-degree murder and arson for setting fire to his apartment during a confrontation with the Special Weapons and Tactics team. He is also charged with threatening and disarming a police officer. On June 30, 2023, Joseph Stephen Jorgensen had an afternoon court hearing regarding the murder charge. Throughout the trial, Joseph shook his head while listening to the assistant district attorney announce that his bail was set at $5 million. The judge remained largely silent throughout the proceedings. Joseph's attorney requested a bail hearing for later. It is believed that a detailed defense strategy is currently being developed. On the same day, Joseph appeared in court. St. Paul Police Sergeant Ernster held a press conference to discuss a significant event that occurred during the ongoing investigation. Fanta Zayavong was also reported missing. She was last seen in July 2021 with Joseph. This new information prompted the police to immediately begin searching for her. During the press conference, it was announced that Fantaseev's remains had been discovered in a separate storage facility in North Minneapolis, approximately 30 miles from where Manij's body was found. Details about the second victim have not been released, but many believe that Joseph was directly involved in her murder. Manij's family has expressed gratitude to the police for any leads in the ongoing investigation. If Joseph is convicted of second-degree murder, he could face a maximum sentence of 40 years in prison. His next court appearance, originally scheduled for August 21, has been postponed for unknown reasons. Joseph Stephen Jorgensen remains in custody at the Ramsey County Jail. Welcome back to our channel. Today we will explore a new case, the case of Lana Clayton. Today, we will discuss a common household medication, eye drops. What a surprise. They have indeed been used as a weapon for murder. Let's begin with the story of Stephen Clayton, a kind-hearted and romantic man who believed in true love. He found great success on his own and was passionate about helping others achieve their goals. Born in South Carolina in 1954, Stephen was a highly motivated individual. By the age of 30, he had established a successful physical therapy business focused on sports injury treatment and rehabilitation. For many years, Stephen lived his dream and achieved remarkable success, earning millions by 1995 and running a large company. After selling his business, he chose to enjoy life and dedicated his free time to teaching and mentoring young entrepreneurs, helping them realize their dreams. Throughout his life, Stephen positively influenced many people, and those he helped felt fortunate to have known him. Stephen was a firm believer in true love and made several attempts to find his soulmate. Despite his past relationships not working out, he remained hopeful of finding the one. His last marriage was to Lana Clayton in 2010. Stephen, who had moved to North Carolina, met Lana online. She was 10 years younger than he was. He quickly became infatuated with her. They got married in November 2013, when Stephen was nearly 60 years old, and Lana, his 7th or 8th wife, after 2 years of marriage. They moved into a luxurious mansion on the shores of Lake Wylie in South Carolina. Designed to resemble George Washington's estate, it was a beautiful, idyllic location surrounded by nature. Stephen had sufficient funds to support this lifestyle even after many years of retirement. Meanwhile, Lana continued to work as a medical professional with the U.S. Department of Veterans Affairs, caring for veterans in various hospitals. Her kindness and compassion deepened Stephen's love for her. She was exactly who he wanted by his side for several years. Stephen's family felt very close to Lana, believing that she and Stephen brought each other happiness. With no apparent signs of trouble in their relationship, little is known about what happened later in Stephen and Lana's marriage. But by 2018, Stephen had passed away on July 21. Around 1 p.m., Lana dashed out of their house into the street, stopping a passing motorcyclist in a panic. She told him her husband needed help and urged him to call 911. The man called emergency services and then saw Lana running to a neighbor's house in search of more help, while the man was speaking with the dispatcher, trying to get help to the scene. He noticed that Lana received a text message on her phone. She appeared visibly angry and did not attempt to hide her emotions. Meanwhile, the neighbor went inside the house to check on Stephen, while Lana stayed outside. It seemed that something traumatic had occurred inside. The ambulance finally arrived, and when they entered the house, they saw that Stephen was lying at the bottom of the main staircase under a white sheet, and sadly, it was too late to save him. The paramedics confirmed that Stephen had died, and everything Lana mentioned about her husband's health, along with his appearance, suggested that his death was accidental. She explained that Stephen had been feeling very dizzy and had been sick for the past few days, unable to get out of bed. That morning, although Stephen still felt unwell, when she checked on him around 11 a.m., he was alive and seemed fine later. Lana decided to go outside and mow the lawn, which took her about 2 hours due to its large size. When she returned to the house, she found Stephen lying at the foot of the stairs. Stephen had not been in good health, and given his age, this could explain his death. Looking back, several years earlier, Stephen had gone to the Bahamas to go diving. He ignored several basic safety rules, which led to him becoming severely ill. He changed from very low pressure to very high pressure too quickly, without allowing his body time to adjust, which is crucial. When diving at different depths, Stephen did not take precautions, which led to long-term complications from decompression sickness. He required several months of rehabilitation and was never able to fully recover, despite all attempts to help him. He continued to experience health issues when the police officers spoke with Lana afterward. They quickly concluded that it was a terrible accident, given Stephen's age and previous health problems. They also considered the possibility of a heart attack. However, not everyone at the scene shared this view. Nick French, one of Stephen's nephews and a police officer from a nearby county, rushed to his uncle's home as soon as he heard the news. He noticed details that others overlooked. For instance, Lana had 2 phones in the house and was a nurse. Why didn't she call 911 herself? Instead, she chose to run into the street to ask a stranger to call for an ambulance, and then went to a neighbor's house for help. When people are under stress, they can sometimes lose their ability to think logically, and this can happen even to those who are well trained. Additionally, Stephen's nephew noticed that the stair runner was not secured in any way. It was completely untouched. If someone, especially someone as tall as Stephen, had fallen down the stairs, the runner would have shifted, but it remained in place. There were also several odd aspects of Lana's behavior that caught Nick's attention right away. She never mentioned that, as a trained nurse, she attempted to revive her husband. The medical examiner said they would take Stephen's body and conduct several tests to determine the exact cause of death and reassure his wife, but Lana was not interested in understanding what had happened to her husband. Her primary concern was to get him to the morgue quickly. Everything about the situation seemed suspicious when someone brought up the investigation into the cause of Stephen's death. Lana appeared very uncomfortable. She started discussing how Stephen had a history of using banned substances and expressed her reluctance to perform an autopsy, fearing it would damage his reputation. However, she quickly added that he wasn't a heavy user. He smoked a little weed and maybe tried some other things occasionally. As she spoke, Lana's demeanor grew increasingly suspicious, especially when Nick suggested contacting Stephen's other nephew, Chris Fagan. Lana strongly opposed this idea, claiming she didn't want Chris to see his uncle in such a condition, believing it would be too difficult for him. However, Chris was an adult and deserved to be informed about what had happened. Nick tried 3 times to persuade Lana to tell Chris, but each time she refused. Ultimately, Nick decided that Chris needed to be informed, and so he would call Chris anyway, while an upset Lana sat on the couch speaking with police officers. Nick went upstairs to make a private call. First, he noticed that Stephen's mobile phone was missing, which was unusual since Stephen always carried it with him. He thought the phone should be lying next to Stephen's bed, on the dresser, or on the bed, but it was nowhere to be seen. Another strange thing Nick noticed was the condition of the room. Although Lana had mentioned that Stephen had been sick in bed for several days, he expected to see a typical mess: tissues, cups, and medicine packaging scattered about. Along with the smell of illness, instead, he was confronted with something entirely different. The bed was completely soaked with urine, indicating that Stephen had been left in deplorable conditions. This was alarming to Nick, especially since Lana, a nurse experienced in caring for veterans, should have ensured her husband was looked after, even if she wasn't sleeping in the same room as him. She could have at least changed the sheets. Investigators believe that Lana intentionally discarded Stephen's phone while he was in bed, preventing him from calling for help. They also think she may have taken his phone several days before his death, since his sister was unable to reach him, which was unusual for him. Chris, Stephen's nephew, whom Lana had wanted to avoid contacting, was eventually informed about the situation. He decided to visit her to see how she was doing and to discuss matters in person. And upon his arrival, he brought up the topic of the will as the heir to Stephen's estate. Chris wanted to locate the will so he could handle his uncle's affairs. However, Lana claimed that Stephen had not created a will. Chris knew this couldn't be true because he had seen the will before. Furthermore, it was hard to believe that Stephen, who was wealthy, intelligent, and 64 years old with health issues, would not have prepared one. The main surprise came when the Clayton family learned that Lana had destroyed Stephen's will. She had started a small fire and burned a stack of legal documents. Lana believed that by doing this, as Stephen's wife, she would automatically inherit his entire estate under South Carolina law, but her actions went further. 2 weeks after Stephen's passing, during his wake, family and friends noticed that Lana had already collected all of his belongings and was trying to give them away at his funeral. She offered his items to relatives, stating that anything they didn't take would be given to outsiders. This behavior raised eyebrows and didn't match what one would expect from a grieving widow. Stephen's nephews were determined not to let their doubts about Lana be ignored. They discreetly contacted the morgue, requested an autopsy and toxicology tests on behalf of the family. All without informing Lana. The forensic toxicologist and medical examiner conducted tests that revealed the true cause of Stephen's death. They discovered that Stephen Clayton had an extremely high level of a chemical commonly found in some eye drops, particularly those used to treat redness. This chemical is designed to constrict blood vessels in the eyes when applied, but when ingested in large amounts, it can depress the central nervous system, cause rapid heart rate, and even result in death, since this substance is colorless, odorless, and tasteless. It can be consumed unknowingly, making it very dangerous. Even at lower doses, it can cause unpleasant side effects like vomiting and diarrhea, while higher doses can lead to life-threatening situations. With this new information in mind, investigators needed to determine whether Stephen had ingested the eye drops. Therefore, on August 29, 2018, Lana was called in for questioning under the pretext of clarifying some details. At that time, she thought she had avoided suspicion. In reality, the detectives wanted to share their findings and observe her reaction, although Lana was aware that an autopsy had been performed without her knowledge. She was unaware that FBI agents and personnel from the York County Sheriff's Office were in the next room, listening to her. During the interrogation, Lana initially acted like a grieving widow who had no idea what had happened to her husband. However, when the detectives began discussing the eye drops, she quickly realized their significance, and her behavior shifted dramatically. She seemed to know about the substance and started to weave a complicated story about Stephen. She claimed that her husband had discovered that adding a few drops of the medication to his morning coffee could act as a laxative, which he had been doing due to his bowel issues. This was her explanation for why the substance was found in Stephen's body. There were many other products available that could address this issue. Lana herself was a nurse, and the detectives couldn't understand why Stephen had been doing this for some time. However, Lana soon sensed that they doubted her initial account. So she changed her story. She suddenly began to assert that Stephen had abused her for years. She attempted to persuade the detectives that her husband was a terrible and cruel person who had used illegal substances. The detectives quickly recognized that her claims were false, as they had already reviewed the toxicology report. If Stephen had been using banned substances regularly, it would have been evident in the report. They also looked into her accusations of his cruelty and found no evidence to support them. Ultimately, Lana began to realize she was in a precarious situation. The interrogation concluded with her returning home. Unaware that the investigators were closely monitoring her, apparently, she thought a lot while driving home, because when Lana got home, she sat down with the detectives and told them almost everything. Lana disclosed that after enduring years of abuse from her husband, she finally reached a breaking point. She admitted to pouring an entire bottle of eye drops into his water, claiming she did not intend to kill him, but wanted him to suffer. Her goal was to make him ill for a day or two, so he wouldn't bother her, giving her a chance to escape his constant demands in a shocking twist. Lana also confessed that 2 years prior to Stephen's death, she had called 911. Claiming she accidentally shot him in the back of the head with a crossbow, she explained that she was just loading the crossbow for protection and accidentally shot him while he was sleeping. Surprisingly, the police believed her story of an accident, and Stephen likely supported her claim, thinking his wife would never intentionally harm him. However, on August 29, 2018, Lana confessed that Stephen's death was not an accident and that she had intentionally killed him to stop him from abusing her. The investigators still believed there was more to the story. The circumstances of the crime scene in Stephen's bedroom led detectives to a specific conclusion. It was evident that Lana had been gradually poisoning him over several days to determine how long it would take to kill him. Specifically, while he spent 3 days in bed feeling dizzy, she was experimenting with the right dosage of poison, and on the 3rd day, she succeeded. Additionally, regarding Stephen's missing mobile phone, detectives suspected that Lana had thrown it into Lake Wylie to prevent him from calling for help when he was unable to move in bed. York County Police arrested Lana Clayton after a thorough investigation based on her confession, which took several days to evaluate. During this time, Lana attempted to harm herself by taking pills and turning on the gas in her home. Fortunately, a neighbor checked on her and discovered the situation. She was quickly taken to the hospital and survived. A few days later, she was officially arrested and charged with murder once it became clear that Lana had killed Stephen. His family began to reflect on the past few years of his marriage. Questioning whether Lana had been planning the murder for a long time, they speculated that their move to South Carolina was deliberate. Considering that state law stipulates a spouse inherits everything if their partner dies without a will, they also remembered that Stephen had experienced unexplained health issues intermittently over several months, and even the best doctors could not help him. On January 17, 2020, Lana pleaded guilty to involuntary manslaughter and tampering with food and drugs. She maintains that she did not intend to kill her husband. The prosecutor described the case as one of the worst in York County's history, according to the prosecution. Lana administered eye drops to Stephen over several days at their home on Lake Wylie and ignored him as he was dying, even throwing his phone into the lake to prevent him from calling for help. Authorities suggest her motive was financial, and she even burned a will. Lana's lawyer argued that she had been a victim of lifelong abuse and suffered from post-traumatic stress disorder, which developed during her marriage to Stephen after a jury deliberated. Lana was sentenced to 25 years in prison without parole. This was a well-thought-out and successfully executed plan on Lana's part. Stephen's relatives confronted the deception of the evil murderer, whom they believed to be not only a good person, but also their friend. Lana deceived not only Stephen, but also his family and friends. Welcome back to our channel. Today we will explore a new case, the case of Linda Curry. To avoid tragedy, sometimes it is enough just to walk away, to leave someone who behaves strangely and potentially dangerously, but in some heartbreaking cases, the victim and the killer remain fated to be together. Leading to an irreversible outcome, Linda was once a charming woman with impeccable taste. She balanced her career during the week with dancing on weekends, which helped her relax and stay active even in her 40s. She looked stunning with her education. Linda achieved professional success, earned a good income, and maintained her perfect image. In 1989, she met Paul Curry at work. Paul quickly impressed Linda with his intelligence. Their relationship gradually developed into marriage, which took place on September 12, 1992, in Las Vegas. Compared to the accomplished Linda, Paul seemed rather ordinary, leaving many to wonder why such a successful woman was attracted to him. Although Linda spoke of him with admiration, their friends felt the couple lacked harmony. Paul was short and not particularly noticeable. Except for his intelligence, he lacked wealth and career success, which he often attributed to his age. Many found Linda's choice unusual. Her friends felt she was simply flattering herself by being with a younger man who was 13 years her junior, about a month after the wedding. Linda called her friend Mary Siebold to tell her that Paul wanted to buy her $1 million life insurance policy, and Paul is the beneficiary. Soon after, Linda began to experience strange and disturbing changes in her life. Previously full of life and energy, she was now tired all the time, and her appearance was affected. These symptoms caused Linda's relatives and Mary to begin to suspect that Paul might be the cause of Linda's declining health. Paul firmly denied these suspicions and even threatened to sue Mary for slander after she made some unfounded comments. However, this did not alleviate her suspicion that Paul might be behind Linda's difficulties. Mary continued to contact Linda and noticed that she was becoming increasingly weak, sensing that something was wrong. Mary advised Linda to leave Paul, believing that he could be a threat. However, Linda insisted that Paul was not the cause of her health problems. She often spoke highly of Paul, describing him as a loving and devoted husband who showed his affection through compliments and romantic gestures. Linda believed that her problems could stem from the stress of her job rather than her relationship. Despite seeing doctors regularly, Linda's health continued to worsen. The medications prescribed had no noticeable effect. Back in the 1960s, when Mary and Linda worked at a nuclear power plant, Linda was known for her impeccable fashion sense, and Mary was often surprised by how she maintained her figure despite enjoying food. During their regular meetings at work and outings, the two women formed a strong bond, sharing everything about their lives. Mary admired Linda's exceptional taste as she skillfully matched outfits, shoes, bags, and accessories. Mary and Linda shared a passion for fashion and beauty. They were also ambitious, career-focused individuals determined to succeed in their respective fields. Linda advanced quickly in her career. She started as a secretary and eventually became a manager with her own office. Linda had been married twice, but had ended both marriages. Afterward, she began a long-term relationship with an insurance agent named Bill Sandretto. They dated for over 8 years. but they never chose to get married. Primarily because Bill valued his independence, Linda and Bill went through multiple breakups during this time. But they always reconciled since the 1980s. Linda has become the head of the department and started earning a good income. Linda was enthusiastic about spending money, but she made an effort to avoid impulsive purchases. She managed her budget well and planned to make several major purchases. In addition to maintaining her fashionable appearance, she bought a car and a spacious house in San Clemente, California. This house was the dream home she had envisioned for many years. Finally, she was able to buy it for herself, marking a significant milestone that confirmed her success. This achievement filled Linda with pride. In early 1989, around the time of Linda's 45th birthday, her relationship with Bill came to an end. Paul, a consulting engineer hired at her company, frequently encountered her. He had a background in nuclear engineering and was a young professional with experience in power plant safety organization. However, he was seen as somewhat eccentric and quickly earned a reputation for being selfish and arrogant. His behavior was often deemed unacceptable, and he used his intelligence as an excuse for it. While Paul was indeed intellectually gifted and outperformed many of his colleagues based on his achievements, he also claimed to have won $26 in the lottery on his first try, which he attributed to careful calculation. Additionally, he belonged to an international community of high IQ individuals and often showcased his certificates. However, aside from that, he lacked any notable accomplishments. Paul was intelligent and charming, which impressed his boss, Linda, who quickly fell in love with him after 3 years of dating. They decided to marry. Fulfilling a long-held dream of Linda's, Linda often described their relationship as very loving, which seemed to justify her choice, even though she later confided to friends that there was no intimacy between them, as Paul showed little interest. Shortly after their marriage, Paul suggested they merge their finances there. Linda contributed most of the income to their household, although they had plenty of money initially. Linda soon realized that her salary was not enough to cover their expenses. Despite her careful budgeting in the past, she found it increasingly difficult to save, and her funds were nearly depleted each month before her next paycheck. When she investigated the issue, she discovered that Paul had been using their joint finances to support 2 ex-wives and 3 children, whom Linda had not known about before their marriage. He dismissed this as a minor deception, and unfortunately, Linda believed him. This revelation surprised her friends, as she had always been financially responsible. As their marriage continued, Paul displayed increasingly suspicious behavior, leading to repeated concerning incidents, along with the story of the insurance contract. This raised red flags since he entered the marriage without any assets. While Linda owned a large mansion, multiple cars, and had invested in designer renovations, she still dressed elegantly and had a taste for expensive items, none of which Paul possessed. Paul must have known that his wife already had several life insurance policies in place, but he was not listed as a beneficiary on any of them. Her sister, ex-boyfriend, and other close relatives were. Instead, there seems to be no good reason for a new insurance policy. Many suspect that his motives were driven by a desire to gain financially in the event of her death, and many began to seriously fear that he would not just wait for such events, but might somehow expedite the process. Just 6 months into their marriage, Linda began to doubt her husband's true intentions. Around this time, her friend Frankie Thurber went through a divorce and found herself in a tough situation. In 1993, Linda offered Frankie a temporary place to stay in her mansion. Influenced by Frankie's experiences, Linda started to question whether her husband genuinely loved her, thinking he was trying to exploit their relationship. As a result, she asked Frankie not only to stay with her, but also to keep an eye on Paul and report any suspicious behavior. Even Frankie noticed that Paul had strong feelings for Linda, which showed in his actions. Although Paul wasn't wealthy and couldn't shower her with gifts, he expressed his love by taking care of her. He would cook delicious meals and pamper her with treats, when she came home from work, followed by running a hot, foamy bath for her. This daily ritual became Linda's favorite. Observing this, and after listening to Frankie, even Mary eventually agreed that Paul seemed to be a loving husband dedicated to making his wife happy. In June 1993, just before their first wedding anniversary, Linda's health began to decline. She experienced a mysterious illness, feeling persistently unwell without any typical symptoms of common ailments, like a cold. Instead, she suffered from ongoing stomach issues. Her condition worsened rapidly, and within a few days, she was hospitalized. By then, Linda was unable to get out of bed, shocking everyone around her, including her doctors. As she was once a healthy and vibrant 45-year-old woman, despite extensive examinations, the cause of her illness remained undetermined. In early July 1993, Linda was admitted to a hospital in Samaritan due to gastrointestinal problems. She was given a private room and assigned a qualified nurse for her care. Paul, her husband, stayed by her side and did everything he could to support her. 2 days after the admission, the nurse connected Linda to an IV for hydration and briefly left to attend to another patient. When the nurse returned, she noticed something alarming. The saline bag appeared unusually dark. The fluid looked cloudy and slightly yellowish, suggesting that something might have been added to it. The nurse quickly disconnected Linda from the IV, took the bag for lab analysis, and reported her findings to the hospital management. On that day, Linda received a visit from her ex-boyfriend Bill, who was shocked by her frail appearance. Linda looked emaciated, as if she was struggling to survive. Within a week, she decided to go home, despite having difficulty walking, and was discharged from the hospital. However, her happiness was short-lived. Just 21 days later, she was readmitted due to a stroke. Linda nearly died, but was saved at the hospital. Subsequently, an analysis of her IV bag revealed a dangerously high dose of the painkiller lidocaine, which should not have been present for intravenous use. The medical center's management contacted the police, prompting an investigation that focused on one suspect, Paul, who was accused of attempting to poison his wife. Despite these alarming developments, Linda maintained that she loved Paul and had no plans to leave him. Did she realize that he might be the poisoner? It's possible that she simply pushed such thoughts away and didn't want to believe them. Meanwhile, her friends and family rallied against Paul, urging Linda to end the relationship for her safety. Nevertheless, she chose to stay with him. Linda eventually recovered from her mysterious illness, but the investigation into the poisoning stalled without any conclusions. Just 5 months later, in December 1993, Linda fell ill again with the same mysterious illness that doctors could not diagnose. Paul took her to a different hospital in Mission Viejo, where no one knew him, although he expressed distrust in the local specialists. The doctors there largely repeated the same diagnoses and conclusions as before. It appeared that Linda was being poisoned slowly. The medical staff also began to suspect her husband, who was always nearby. A nurse was assigned to monitor and care for Linda. She secretly communicated with Linda and warned her that her husband might have ulterior motives. A few days later, a similar incident occurred to one that had happened 5 months earlier. The nurse had briefly stepped out, leaving Paul alone with Linda. When the nurse returned, Paul was missing, and the IV drip bag looked different. It was later analyzed and found to be contaminated with unknown substances. The medical staff was already suspicious of Paul, believing he might be involved in an attempt to harm Linda to ensure her safety. They even placed a warning sign at the entrance of her room, with the content prohibiting Paul Curry from entering without an escort. The police were called back to Linda's room, where she explained that Paul had significant credit card debts, yet she insisted he was a wonderful, devoted, and loving husband. She maintained that he was very kind and could never harm her. It was possible that both medical institutions had misjudged the situation. When investigators interviewed Paul, he insisted that he had no idea what was happening to his wife and was simply waiting for her recovery. However, case records revealed a troubling discovery during searches of their mansion. In Paul's room, on his dresser, were all the life insurance policies taken out on his wife. This raised suspicions after Linda was discharged from the hospital. She spoke with Frankie, who confirmed that she had not placed the documents there, which meant Paul had done it. There was no one else involved. It was evident that Paul aimed to profit from her death. Despite this, Linda did not believe he was capable of such a terrible act. Nearly 6 months later, on June 9, 1994, Mary received an email from Paul informing her that Linda was feeling worse than ever and that an ambulance had been called. He believed Linda was dying and urged Mary to come and support her later. Around midnight, Paul called 911, claiming he had awakened to find his wife not breathing. In subsequent conversations with Linda's family and the police, he maintained that he sensed something was wrong, saw that Linda was barely breathing, and tried to perform artificial respiration, but she did not respond, prompting him to call for emergency help. By the time Linda arrived at the hospital, she had already died. Paul appeared to be a heartbroken widower, crying on the shoulders of Linda's family and friends, while they all quietly suspected him of murder. During the autopsy, the forensic expert found an unusual mark behind Linda's right ear, which they believed might be a sign of a syringe injection. A toxicology report later showed that Linda had a lethal amount of nicotine in her blood. This was particularly puzzling since Linda had never smoked. How could nicotine have entered her system? Consequently, her death was ruled a murder. But authorities found no evidence linking Paul to the crime. There were no syringes or needles at the scene, and the IV bags from previous cases did not have Paul's fingerprints. Meanwhile, Paul attempted to claim $1 million in life insurance from his deceased wife because he had previously successfully convinced Linda to purchase a new policy. Soon after Linda's death, it was discovered that she had handwritten a note, leaving half of her estate to her sister. This infuriated Paul, who sought legal advice to claim the entire inheritance, but he was unsuccessful. Everything had to be divided. In the end, Paul Curry collected $419 from Linda's 2 life insurance policies and her retirement plan. It also came to light that all of Paul's educational and professional credentials were forged. Even the supposed International Organization of Intellectuals was a scam. He hadn't even graduated from college. As a result, he was fired from his job. Now, these incidents were decided to be viewed in a new light. In 2002, the former state prosecutor retired, and a new one took over, showing immediate interest in Linda's case. At the time of Linda's death, he was still in law school, but he had since become the district attorney and was eager to make a name for himself. He was particularly intrigued by the media used to store evidence from the mid-90s, especially the extensive analysis of microcassette analysis. All conversations with suspects and witnesses had been recorded, including an interview with Linda conducted shortly before her death while she was in the hospital in August 19, 1993. During the investigation, authorities believed Linda was a victim of poisoning and sought to identify any potentially dangerous individuals in her life who might want to harm her. Mary quickly named one suspect, Paul Curry. He had the most significant motive. He stood to gain $1 million from insurance and ownership of his wife's property. The new prosecutor investigated the background of Paul and found that his entire life was based on deception. A poison expert specializing in substances like nicotine was consulted for the case. He determined that the nicotine level in the victim's blood was 4 to 5 times higher than a lethal dose, which could not have resulted from smoking alone, given the forensic expert's initial findings. It was concluded that Paul had administered a fatal injection discreetly behind Linda's ear. Death occurred approximately 20 to 30 minutes later, leaving no chance to save Linda. In addition to nicotine, significant amounts of a sedative and sleeping pill were detected in her blood. It appeared that he first sedated his wife to administer the lethal injection without raising suspicion. Adding the sleeping pill was easy for him since he often cooked for Linda and experimented with different sauces and spices. A neighbor testified that Paul went to the store for cigarettes that evening. However, it was clear that Linda could not have absorbed such a high dose of nicotine even if she had smoked 5 packs. The nicotine must have been injected. After losing his job, Paul relocated to Kansas, where he remarried and had a son. He initially worked as a used car salesman and did well, but later grew bored and switched to being a building inspector. During this time, he had never broken the law and seemed to be a good family man and a respected member of the community. On November 9, 2010, Sergeant Schull questioned Paul Curry under the pretense of questioning him as a potential witness in an unrelated case. In reality, they aimed to discuss Linda's death. Paul, believing they were out-of-state police officers unfamiliar with him and his late wife, began talking freely when asked about his past relationships, without requesting any identification. To the officer's surprise, he shared a story that contradicted his earlier statements. This led to the decision to arrest Paul Curry for revealing too much information. 16 years after his wife's death, Paul was finally held accountable. Unfortunately, justice did not hurry, and he did not appear in court until September 2014. During this time, he had spent all that time in jail. Paul faced charges of premeditated murder, which, according to state law, could result in life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. The defense attorney employed a typical strategy of denial, arguing that the prosecution lacked direct evidence connecting Paul to Linda's murder. The defense claimed that Linda had given herself a nicotine enema, supposedly based on someone's suggestion of this unusual treatment for her stomach pain. Meanwhile, the prosecution stated that a sedative was found in her blood. Noting that there was no prescription for it and that it wasn't provided by the hospital, they alleged that Paul had given his wife the drug to sedate her before the murder. The prosecution also claimed that Paul was the only person in Linda's life with a serious motive and had been alone with her for at least 6 hours prior to her death, clearly having done something to her, as there was no one else who could have done it. After both sides presented their arguments, the jury went into deliberation, which lasted a day and a half. As a result, Paul Curry was found guilty of first-degree murder with the intent to profit, and he was sentenced to life in prison. Paul never admitted his guilt, so the exact circumstances surrounding Linda's death remain a mystery. Hello everyone. Today we will learn about another case, the case of Maria Fernanda Quesada. For most people, family is the most important aspect of life. However, finding a trustworthy partner who can be the ideal husband and father is not always easy. Infatuation can cloud judgment, leading some individuals to commit to unsuitable partners, which can sometimes turn life into a nightmare. Maria Fernanda Quesada lived in La Gloria, Nueva Costa Rica. Born in 1994, she was a kind and beautiful girl. She was a strong and independent woman with dreams of becoming a mother. She wasn't overly focused on her career. Instead, she valued the warmth and comfort of a family. She wished for siblings, but was her parents' only child. Her family is close-knit and loving, often held up as a model for other families. Her parents provided her with a comfortable home and a good education, which is still not accessible to everyone in Costa Rica. The environment there is not as favorable as in many other Latin American countries. Maria had a great relationship with her family, and she was especially close to her maternal aunt. They were similar in age, shared experiences, supported one another, and regularly met and communicated. Maria shared all her secrets with her aunt, and they felt like best friends. People recognized Maria as a friendly and outgoing person who could easily connect with strangers, which helped her make many friends. She fell in love for the first time at 19, believing it was a genuine feeling that would lead to happiness, a family, children, and a cozy cottage by the sea. Unfortunately, the reality was different. Her boyfriend took advantage of her and left when he became interested in someone else. To make matters worse, Maria discovered she was pregnant at that time. 9 months later, she gave birth to a boy. She hoped her ex-boyfriend would care for their son, but he showed no interest in either of them. Faced with this situation, Maria had to work hard to support herself and her child, as their financial situation was tight. She wanted to provide her son with a future as good as the one her parents had given her. Fortunately, her parents did not abandon her or the baby. They continued to support them, which helped create a stable environment for the child. During this challenging time, the family offered her the support she needed. Although it was difficult, they all managed to get through it together. This all took place during a time of advanced technology, which allowed Maria to use a computer and access the internet. She didn't want to just wait for things to improve. Instead, she sought an additional source of income by learning how to make handmade soap. After trying her hand at this craft, she discovered she had the potential for even more. This marked the beginning of Maria's journey as a skilled professional with a variety of talents. In addition to selling handmade soap to friends and online, she also learned how to do manicures. She created several groups on social media to showcase her skills, and her client base quickly began to expand. Maria dreamed of building her own website and eventually opening a salon. From the start, her efforts received positive feedback, and her clients were happy with her services. At this point, her main focus was on the well-being of her child and family, and she dedicated her free time to them. Maria longed for love and a family. She dreamed of finding a man to complete her. One day, while she was out in the city gathering materials, she met Esteban Rovira Vargas. He was 16 years older than she was, and despite their age difference, Maria fell deeply in love with him. It's unclear how he left such a strong impression on her, as he was very different from her. Esteban was hot-tempered and aggressive, with a complicated past linked to crime, although he avoided discussing it. Their romance lasted several months before Maria felt ready to introduce him to her family. The meeting was chaotic. Esteban made such a strong impact that her parents were firmly opposed to him. The primary issue with her parents stemmed from Esteban's rudeness, foul language, and blatant disrespect towards others. He came across as cruel and unpredictable. When Maria's parents noticed this, Esteban reacted so violently that Maria had to intervene to prevent a scandal. In the end, Maria's parents insisted that she completely end her relationship, but their efforts were in vain. Maria had strong feelings for Esteban and was determined to stay with him no matter what. Understanding this, her parents reconciled, not wanting to jeopardize their relationship with their daughter or lose the chance to have a future grandchild. A few days later, Maria met Esteban's family, who were just like him, tough and unkind, which made Maria uncomfortable. She confided in her aunt that Esteban was the most reasonable person in his family. Despite his difficult personality, their relationship continued to grow. Esteban appears surprisingly calm around Maria, seemingly relying on her to help curb his temper. On April 6, 2019, they got married. Unfortunately, shortly after the wedding, Esteban revealed that Maria's parents had been right about him. He became increasingly abusive, starting to physically assault her almost immediately. The abuse happened every day, and Maria suffered both physical and emotional torment while trying to keep their new family together. Moreover, she was pregnant with their second child, which made her feel that if she could just hold on, things would improve after the baby was born. Above all, Maria did not want to raise another child without a father. Maria gave birth to her second child in 2020 and became increasingly overwhelmed by the situation. Just before the baby arrived, she moved in with her parents because she could no longer cope and was worried about her health and the baby's safety. After the birth, her husband seemed to have a change of heart. He visited her, sincerely apologized for his past mistakes and the pain he had caused, thanked her for their new son, and promised never to hurt her or argue with her again. Maria believed her plan had worked, but her family, especially her mother and aunt, remained skeptical. They recognized this behavior as typical of manipulators and feared the cycle would repeat. In the following months, Esteban genuinely devoted his free time to Maria and their newborn. He behaved like a caring husband and father, refraining from violence. It appeared that their family life was improving, and they began to share joyful moments together. Esteban also started to spend more time with Maria's older son, who was 7 at the time. However, Maria noticed that he seemed to show more affection for his biological child. Despite this, she felt happy about the positive changes. Esteban even changed jobs, securing a well-paying position as a Spanish teacher in a private school for foreign students, which greatly improved their financial situation. Maria frequently told her friends and family that she was genuinely happy, and even her aunt began to believe it might be true. Maria often kept in touch with her family, sharing that after the birth of their son, Esteban changed drastically. He managed to hide his aggressive and cruel nature, making family life feel like the fairy tale she had always wanted. During this time, they posted many family photos on social media, portraying themselves as happy parents with their children. It appeared to be a happy and healthy family. In this seemingly peaceful environment, more than a year went by. However, Esteban was actually suppressing his anger, which was building up like a tightly wound spring, ready to snap. Eventually, he lost control. He shouted at his wife for no reason and physically harmed her, leaving bruises on her face. Maria, in tears, turned to her relatives to share what had happened. She was reluctant to go to the police, hoping that things would improve and that she could keep the family together for their child's sake. Unfortunately, the situation worsened quickly. After just a few incidents, Esteban began to pressure and torment her even more than he had before the baby was born. Her relatives urged her to end the relationship. Esteban had reverted to the cruel person he had always been, unable to control his inner demons. In December 2021, Maria decided she could no longer endure the abuse. She reported her husband, Esteban. When Maria went to the police station to file her report, she presented fresh bruises on her body. Esteban had struck her so hard that she had visible hematomas on her face. She expressed that this situation could not continue any longer. Maria was frightened for her safety and her children's well-being. During the police investigation, her claims were supported by both her family and several neighbors who had witnessed Esteban's aggressive behavior. Neighbors witnessed that she had faced constant abuse from her husband. He would provoke arguments almost every day, which often escalated into brutal beatings. Maria was so beaten down that she feared talking to Esteban, worried it would lead to another fight. Maria was frequently seen with bruises, and the cause was always the same. Ultimately, she was able to obtain a restraining order, which prohibited Esteban from approaching her or their son without her permission. She moved in with her relatives, along with her sons. Maria warned her family that her husband should not be allowed near their home. If he was seen, they should call the police. Even after obtaining a restraining order, Esteban was often spotted near the Quesada family's home. While he appeared to be loitering, it was clear he was looking for a chance to see Maria. Each time he was seen uninvited, he would leave quickly to avoid provoking a police call, but he continued to appear in the area, which was very concerning. Maria and Esteban were going through a divorce, along with custody and property disputes. Unfortunately, the process was progressing too slowly. Maria hoped to prove her husband's cruelty to ensure he would lose the chance to see their son. She feared that if he had contact with the boy, he would suffer the same abuse she had endured. On March 3, 2022, he showed up at Maria's parents' house without her permission. Some of her relatives were there, and they greeted Esteban with displeasure at the door. He requested to speak with Maria to address some issues regarding their divorce, emphasized that the discussion would focus on the division of their shared property. Witnesses present during the meeting observed that, despite his calm demeanor, Esteban was struggling to control his emotions. Maria consented to talk with her husband, particularly since he was not shouting or using foul language as he typically did. However, her family was concerned and advised her not to leave with a man they viewed as dangerous. Esteban insisted that Maria accompany him to retrieve some personal items she had forgotten during their hasty move. He also requested that their conversation remain private. Eventually, he persuaded her to get into the car. Esteban asked Maria to leave their older son with relatives, but he wants her to take the younger son with her. Maria agreed to this arrangement. As soon as they left her parents' house, arguments erupted again, starting the moment they were in the car. Esteban became more aggressive and eventually lost his temper, shouting loudly. They pulled over near the Quesada family home, where a neighbor noticed them arguing inside the car. Upon arriving at the house where they had lived before separating, noise and upheaval could be heard. It seemed that Esteban was breaking things or physically harming his wife again. The child was crying from inside the house. Their 2-year-old son could be heard pleading with his father to stop. Outside, a neighbor heard Maria calling for help. The neighbor rushed to the house but realized he had left his phone behind and couldn't call the police. At that moment, Esteban called his sister, revealing that he had just killed his ex-wife in front of their son, claiming she had attacked him first. His sister was horrified and urged him to take the child and go to the police, but he ignored her. Instead, Esteban left the scene of the crime, still wearing the blood-stained shirt from the incident. He placed the child in the front passenger seat of the car and quickly drove away. Several neighbors called the police, and Esteban's sister also reported the incident. When the police arrived, Esteban had already left the scene. They sealed off the area where Maria was lying, where she was attacked by her husband in the kitchen. The police spoke to the neighbors who were gathered outside Esteban's home. The neighbors confirmed that Esteban had a long history of violent behavior. He was generally disliked in the community due to his rude and aggressive demeanor, often shouting at people for no reason, leading people to keep their distance. Although Maria eventually left him and obtained a restraining order, she made the mistake of getting back into his car. Meanwhile, a white car was driving down the road with Esteban and their 2-year-old son inside. The child was the only witness to the horrific murder, watching as his father stabbed his mother 11 times, mainly in her upper body and head. Maria tried to fight back, but she was powerless. Judging by the position of several wounds, Esteban had likely attacked her from behind. It did not seem as though she had provoked him. Her desperate attempts to fend off his assault were doomed to fail. Realizing that Esteban was trying to escape with their child, a large-scale operation was organized to capture him. The criminal's vehicle was put on alert, and several patrol units were dispatched to intercept him. His condition and intentions were unclear, and the child might be in danger. The police were hesitant to use force to stop the suspect because they feared for the boy's safety. Instead, they decided to follow Esteban. However, catching or even locating him proved to be extremely difficult. Shortly after the search began, officers found Esteban's abandoned car just a few kilometers from the scene of the violent incident, suggesting that Esteban had already switched vehicles. The police had no information about the car Esteban was currently using, and it appeared that he and the child had only one escape route, crossing the border. This raised the risk of losing track of them entirely, as Esteban could take a bus, use another car, or get a ride from someone. The authorities set up checkpoints in hopes of catching Esteban when he tried to cross the border. Fortunately, their strategy paid off. Within a few hours, they tracked him down at a checkpoint while he was attempting to pass through in a stolen vehicle. The border officers had been notified, so when he presented his identification, the chase ended. Esteban was arrested without any resistance. His 2-year-old son had been in the passenger seat the whole time and thankfully had not been harmed. During the search of the vehicle, authorities discovered a firearm and a blood-stained knife, which could have been the murder weapon used against Maria. It was puzzling why the suspect had not disposed of these items earlier. He was promptly sent to the police in his hometown and imprisoned. Esteban now faced serious charges of femicide and was subject to severe penalties typically imposed for such crimes in Latin America. After investigating the knife found in the vehicle, it was confirmed that the blood on it belonged to Maria, and the handle carried Esteban's fingerprints, leaving no doubt about his guilt. The custody of Maria's children was to be transferred to her parents. The older child was quickly placed in the care of Maria's parents. However, there were troubles involving the younger child. Even though Esteban had murdered the child's mother right in front of him and was awaiting trial in prison, Esteban still retained custody rights over the child under Costa Rican law. The boy became embroiled in a custody dispute between the families of his biological parents. The Vargas family aggressively sought custody, employing questionable tactics. They attempted to discredit Maria, suggesting that this could somehow excuse the murder. They claimed that Maria had neglected her sons for a long time and did not care for them properly. Instead, she pressured Esteban, which led him to lash out at her. Ultimately, they suggested that one day, during a heated argument related to their divorce, Maria attacked Esteban, leaving him no choice but to defend himself with a kitchen knife, resulting in wounds inflicted to stop her. They also attempted to portray Maria's parents negatively, arguing that they were unfit guardians. Maria's relatives had long spoken of her suffering from psychological and physical abuse, with accusations of beatings and threats supported by family, friends, and neighbors. Esteban's family depicted him as a victim, which many found hard to believe. Of course, this was a blatant lie. However, statements from Esteban's relatives complicated the prosecution's investigation, forcing them to challenge these claims and gather evidence to support the Quesada family. As a result, a meeting was held to address the situation, which sparked activism from various feminist groups closely following this troubling case of violence. In March 2023, large protests demonstrated strong support for the victim's family. It was evident that the misleading narrative from Esteban and his relatives did not convince anyone, except perhaps the defense. The public wanted to ensure that the murderer faced severe punishment. Women across the country asserted that a lack of accountability only led to more violent crimes, and the statistics clearly supported their claims. The trial of Esteban Rivera Vargas, who abused his family, resumed in Santa Cruz on March 9, 2023. The prosecution argued that he deliberately killed his wife. In contrast, the defense, supported by Esteban and his family, claimed that he was actually the victim. However, their claims were quickly proven false, as the prosecution presented multiple witnesses, including neighbors, who testified to Esteban's violent behavior. Sadly, Maria's youth and innocence led her to make poor decisions, while the Vargas family's lies were exposed through forensic analysis, which conclusively resolved the case. The nature of Maria's injuries ruled out the possibility that she had attacked Esteban. 2 strikes to her back clearly indicated a planned assault. Esteban had intended to harm her from the outset. Maria's younger son could not serve as a witness due to his age. However, recordings of conversations with their 2-year-old child were presented in court. These recordings revealed that Esteban repeatedly acted aggressively and often assaulted Maria. The older son also testified, corroborating his brother's claims about the violence inflicted by Esteban. Both children were afraid of him, especially the older son, who was not Esteban's biological child and held a strong bias against him. As a result of their traumatic experiences and the loss of their mother, both sons were sent for psychological treatment. The prosecution sought a 37-year prison sentence for the defendant, while the defense maintained his innocence throughout the trial, attempting to reduce his sentence and even aiming for an acquittal. Fortunately, these efforts were unsuccessful. In May 2023, the court ruled in favor of Maria. The defendant, Esteban Rovira Vargas, was sentenced to 35 years and 8 months in prison, and he is currently serving his sentence in a maximum security facility. Additionally, Esteban was ordered to pay 75 million Costa Rican colones in compensation to Maria's family.